בחרמון נמס השלג בחצי הלילה, בחרמון זורם לו פלג בחצי הליל, אבא שם על הר השלג בחצי הלילה, שר שירים על נס בפלא עם כל ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. בבקעת תמר פורח בחצי הלילה, הירח שם זורח בחצי הליל, שם אחי ודאי שומע בחצי הלילה את שירנו השמח כאן בישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. במדבר הולך החושך בחצי הלילה, שקט הס בארץ גושן בחצי הליל, לדודי עיני נחושת בחצי הלילה, וגם הוא חוגג כמו שכל בית ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. ואני יושב בבית בחצי הלילה, עם נרות וגביע יין בחצי הליל, וכוכב מאיר עיניים בחצי הלילה, לי מוסר ברכת שמיים ולכל ישראל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. האביב שוב צוהל ואיתי משתולל, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה לילה, איזה ליל. שוב צוהל.
Прийшли окупанти до нас в Україну, форма новенька, воєнні машини, та трохи поплавився їх інвентар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Російські танкісти сховались в кущі, щоб лаптем посьорбати довбані щі, та трохи у чах перегрівся навар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Приперли зі сходу до нас барани для восстановлення
великої страни.
Найкращий пастух баранячих отар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Їх доводи всяке озброєння, різне, потужні ракети, машини залізні, у нас на всі доводи є коментар. Байрактар, Байрактар. Вони захопити хотіли нас зразу, а ми зачаїли на орків образу з російських бандитів, робить примар. Байрактар, Байрактар.
Future
Yes.
The Leaf Spring Army sends its regards.
Hello, everyone. I'm the Enforcer, and I'm accompanied by Enforcer Matt.
And good evening, folks. It's Enforcer Matt, and welcome back to day 1003 of the news. And it's good to see you all once again. And today we have even more massive escalations. The North Koreans are amassing on Ukraine's border, about to go into Ukraine. Also, U.S. is changing the nuclear doctrine, and also Russia's going to launch even more IRBMs. And things are getting absolutely insane on a daily basis at this point. And it's good to see you all once again.
And we are going to be covering the past 24 hours of news from around the world, as we have been hearing very concerning news today that the United States of America has officially changed its nuclear doctrine as well as its readiness level for U.S. nuclear forces, considering the continuous escalatory measures that are being taken by the Russian Federation in the Ukraine war and also against the Western world at large. At the exact same time, an unsuspecting and very odd package was seen outside the gates of the U.S. Embassy in London today, which the Metropolitan Police then detonated from a remote distance, and apparently we still do not know any details or information about the package. But from what we understand, it was some sort of an explosive that was remotely detonated by the London Metropolitan Police today, possibly a Russian sabotage attack against the U.S. Embassy that failed. At the exact same time, inside the Russian Federation, we've been able to hear that the Russian Federation's President, Vladimir Putin, has continued to claim that the Russian Federation is in possession of multiple Rubesh-modified rockets that are specifically called, and I want to make sure that we get the name of this correctly, the Oreshnik, which largely, from what we understand, is pretty much just a very souped up and modified RS-26 Rubesh, which has been in service since the times of the Soviet Union, but they claim that they have more of them and will continue to use them in a conventional sense against the state of Ukraine well on into the future, pledging that more intermediate range ballistic missile attacks will continue as far as the war keeps going. At the exact same time, we were able to get some footage from last night showing us the launch of the Oreshnik from the Kapustin Yar testing range outside of the area of Znamensk and Odrybinsk in the area of the southern Don region. And we were also able to hear additional information as well that the Ukrainian armed forces are seeking a THAAD terminal high altitude air defense system to be able to try and deal with the major issues that IRBM launches are going to be posing on into the future. We were also able to get some follow-up footage as well from inside of the attack at Marino, where we were able to see some of the storm shadows rocketing their way at low altitude across the lands of the Russian Federation and on into the town of Marino, where they would apparently cause severe damage not only to the Russian command post that was there, but also the North Korean commanders that were the leaders of the North Korean Expeditionary Force. But that North Korean Expeditionary Force has been tracked today by Ukrainian intelligence outside of the Russian Federation for the first time ever, as Ukrainian intelligence is noting that apparently North Korean soldiers are beginning to arrive in larger numbers within the Kharkiv area, specifically within the Vovchansk front, as it does appear that some sort of an arrangement has been made quietly behind the scenes by the Russian Federation and North Korea to further expand the involvement of the North Korean Expeditionary Forces outside of Russia's domestic borders and into international borders, including the actual occupied territories of Ukraine. This has also been heard as well inside the city of Mariupol, as apparently observers and North Korean civil engineers have arrived in the city of Mariupol for unknown reasons, most likely to help with rebuilding the city. Maybe, possibly, we're not entirely sure on that one. But at the exact same time, we have been able to hear that heavy battles have been waged across the entirety of the Ukrainian front line from Vovchansk and all the way down into the area of Velika Novosilka, where heavy casualties have been taken by Russian Federation armed forces, and at the exact same time, it appears that the Ukrainian defenders are once again holding their front lines incredibly well and continuing to inflict very high casualties on the Russians and ensuring that they make almost no frontline gains on a day-to-day basis. This is not the only news that we have, as we did get to hear from inside the Russian Federation today that a major fire has broken out at the town of Novocherkassk, just a couple of miles northeast of the city of Rostov-on-Don. The exact reason for the fire is unknown at the moment, but we are trying to get some additional information as to what caused the fire and what is currently burning on the ground. We have also been able to see, in a very limited note, that an airstrike has occurred in Dahiya today inside of southern Beirut by the Israeli Air Force as they continue to deal with high-value targets of Hezbollah forces and the IRGC that is being operated by the Islamic Republic inside of the Middle East. We have an absolutely insane amount of news to cover today. And today's news is a fairly escalatory one at that, with what we're seeing on both sides at this moment. And we are going to be getting into exactly what's happening today, because the news is, to say the least, it is quite breaking news, to be entirely honest.
Man, I tell you what, it seems like Russia, North Korea, and all the Axis powers are trying to deliver us a Christmas gift of World War III this year, the way they're going.
It really does look like it. And moving on into what has led to the United States changing its nuclear doctrine as well as its nuclear readiness today, we were able to hear from inside the Russian Federation that Vladimir Putin claims that they have more Oreshnik missiles just like the one that was fired towards Ukraine just last night. We do not have a direct translation for this clip, but nevertheless, the direct quote I will read after the clip ends. And so here's the clip of Putin speaking.
Знаете, вчера я проинформировал личный состав вооруженных сил, граждан России, наших союзников во всем мире, а также тех, кто пытается
I wonder if this is actually Putin this time, or is it the body double? This guy's not looking as confident as he usually tries to portray.
He looks about as worn out and tired as the one that we saw a couple of days ago, so I'm thinking that this might be the real McCoy. But nevertheless, the direct quote from this statement here that was made in this video is that the tests of the Oreshnik were successful, and they will continue to conduct these tests in combat conditions, meaning in no short sense of the word that they will continue to fire Oreshnik missiles into Ukraine in a conventional sense well on into the future. He also added that they have a stock of such weapon systems, and he also says that the Oreshnik is not a modernization of an old Soviet system, it is the result of brand new work. That is largely a flat-out lie, and we do have to make that very clear, because the Oreshnik missile is quite literally a modification of the RS-26 Rubesh. We have known that for a couple of days at this point, and so trying to state that it is a brand new super weapon, it does not really make that much sense. And really quickly, let me make sure to try and get y'all some of the official information that we have, at least at the moment. And let me see here. Let's see. Here we go. So, This is the best information that we can have at the moment. And of course, a lot of people are going to deride Wikipedia, but considering that the Oreshnik is fairly new, considering that this is one of the first times we've ever heard about it, this is the only information that we really have to work off of. There hasn't been an Encyclopedia Britannica written on the Oreshnik missile yet, but according to what we know, the Deputy Pentagon Press Secretary has described the Oreshnik as a variant of Russia's RS-26 Rubesh. Considering that this information came out from the United States Department of Defense and was approved for the press secretary to state, we do understand that the Oreshnik is largely a modified RS-26 Rubesh that is maybe a little bit more capable than the RS-26, but probably not by much. And also on top of that, we know that the Russian Federation cannot be messing with the tried and true formula of Soviet weapon systems. We have seen that the Russian Federation has attempted to create new intercontinental ballistic missiles in the modern day, such as the Sarmat intercontinental ballistic missile, but every single test of the weapon system, including all subsequent tests since it's officially been put into service with the Russian nuclear forces, have all been failures, with the rocket either exploding at the pad or quickly exploding after takeoff. We do know for this reason that the Russian Federation couldn't have modified the Oreshnik missile far too much from its original model, which would be the RS-26 Rubesh, and for this reason, we're believing that pretty much the two of them are identical, or in a fancy word, analogous to each other. Nevertheless, we were also able to hear that they will, by no sense of the imagination, continue to test fire Oreshnik missiles in combat against the Ukrainian armed forces and against major Ukrainian cities inside of Ukraine. This is a very interesting thing to note, as it is showing us that the Russian Federation is going to continue to conduct escalatory measures well on into the future by firing more Oreshnik missiles, or really RS-26s, into Ukraine at major cities, attempting to try and either scare Ukraine and the West collectively, or maybe even slip in some form of a nuclear weapon, or even more devastating weaponry like conventional warheads outside of their kinetic rounds that they're using right now, which is literally just the bulk of the re-entry vehicle slamming into a target, which doesn't really cause that much damage. We were able to see, however, a video that emerged just today showing us the RS-26 after it launched from Kapustin Yar as it was going exo-atmospheric. This was during the post-boost phase, right after the rocket, well, the first stage detached. We believe that this is sometime around the end of the burn of the second stage that we're seeing right here, but this was the missile as it was making its way to Ukraine. Additional information has come out from the United States Department of Defense, letting us know that apparently, and you can actually see the first stage detaching right there and the second stage starting, as you can see that little disruption in, I guess you could say, its flare, if you want to call it that, or the engine's flare. But beyond that, from what we are understanding, it is a very concerning thing that we've been hearing, that the Russian Federation is most likely going to be continuing test firing these sorts of weapon systems. I cannot say this enough. While they are at the moment not using any kind of even conventional rounds on board the Oreshniks, this is a major escalation, and one that's incredibly concerning, because at any given moment, considering that this thing is nuclear capable and does have a MIRV system on board, this thing could easily start to land nuclear warheads across a large area of Ukraine rather quickly if we were to see it launched again and we were not notified, and this thing actually did have a nuclear warhead on board. We were also able to
say that's insane to see that thing creating like such a flare like that. Also, just out of curiosity, and I'm not saying like, Putin's about to launch nukes tomorrow or anything like that, but if they were to launch like an ICBM, would it be the same sort of like phenomenon happening, this sort of like flare phenomenon, just like this?
For the large part, yes.
Very interesting. So this is what a nuclear launch might look like if they decided to pull that off.
For the most part, yeah, it would pretty much look exactly like this. Pretty much all rockets, especially when they're fired at night, have this kind of effect in the atmosphere that's very easily seen. And so ICBM launches would look like this, but at least in the specific launch areas, you would see these kinds of things in the hundreds, most likely, considering that they would be firing off most of their ICBMs at that point. But another interesting thing that we were able to hear from the Department of Defense today is that apparently they tracked it from its launch to its impact, and it did not take 7 minutes like we were assuming yesterday. Interestingly enough, it actually took 15 minutes. And this may be the reason why the Russian Federation notified the United States. This 15 minutes allows for the President of the United States to be notified that there is an IRBM that is currently launched at the moment, and allows for about 7 minutes of decision-making time before this weapon made impact into Ukraine. This is also meaning that this missile is flying about twice as slow as we were originally anticipating, and this may be showing that our original calculations, based off of the speed that is publicly stated by the Russian Federation, which we were using to calculate yesterday, may be off, and we may actually know that this missile is actually far slower, at least in most of its flight path, including its terminal phase, where it can be intercepted right before impacting its target. And we could see the missile continuing to fly over the southern Russian Don area as it started to make it into Ukraine. And this was, I believe, somewhere just a little bit before its apogee that we're seeing in the film right there. And the apogee is where it reaches the absolute peak of its height, and then it starts to return back towards the surface in its terminal phase for the large part. But moving on from that little clip right there, these things have not been taken lightly by the United States. And while the Russian Federation did conduct, I guess you could say, nuclear de-escalation by calling us and then stating that they were going to be launching this missile without any warheads on board, just using the actual MIRV system as a kinetic sort of a weapon, it does appear the United States is currently taking this situation incredibly seriously, as we were able to hear a statement today from the United States Department of Defense that the nuclear readiness has been heightened and nuclear doctrine is being changed where necessary. According to what we are hearing at the moment, we are seeing that almost all U.S. nuclear forces are being put on a higher level of alert, including the B-61 gravity bombs, which, just to explain that really quickly, a gravity bomb sounds really technologically advanced. What a gravity bomb is, it's literally just a normal bomb. It is pulled down to the surface by gravity, and then it explodes over its target, quite like any normal bomb. So that's just really a fancy way of saying it's a nuclear bomb that we would drop, kind of like a fat man or a little boy on Hiroshima or Nagasaki, just in a really modern form. We also got to hear that apparently all of the Ohio-class submarines that are currently underway at sea have all been put onto a heightened state of nuclear readiness, and we're also starting to hear rumors that more B-61 nuclear bombs may actually be sent to Europe. We only have a handful of them currently inside of the continent, but more may be sent here in the near future to be able to conduct a nuclear retaliatory strike if necessary against the Russian Federation, which of course I have to put this out there, nuclear war is not a certainty at this point in between the Russian Federation and the West, but at the same time, the United States and really any countries like to take precautions when necessary to make sure that the other side does not end up conducting a preemptive nuclear attack, which while the Russian Federation technically can't due to their doctrine, they did modify the doctrine just around 3 days ago where they possibly could justify an attack like that down their chain of command. And for this reason, the United States has to be ready at any given moment to be able to operate on that precaution. And for this reason, we are hearing some slight rumors that have not been confirmed yet that more gravity bombs are going to be sent on their way into Eastern Europe and maybe deployed in Germany or maybe forward deployed into Poland to allow for less of a lag time, I guess you could call it, in the delivery of those nuclear weapons to an active front line if it does form. We are still,
I'm not gonna lie, that's a little bit concerning to me because obviously, like, nuclear war is not about to start tomorrow, in my opinion. But at the same time, though, we already had nukes aimed at Russia that can reach Russia. But the fact that we're going to potentially send some more over, that's a little bit concerning to me because that is a little bit escalatory, obviously. And also, we're not really totally worried with trying to like push Russia over the edge because they're kind of going that way themselves. But that does kind of push it a little bit further toward the brink just a little bit. And I'm not gonna lie, the situation with the nukes and the new missiles flying is a little bit concerning. I think that was Putin's objective behind it, and everyone's gonna say that's what his objective was. He was trying to scare the West, and that is true. But nonetheless, we can't just totally ignore the fact that it is getting a little bit out of hand with the nuclear situation, and also these new missiles being used, which are obviously nuclear capable.
I would have to agree. It is a very concerning thing, but I do have to put this out there that the Russian Federation has not scared the West, as in we're terrified of the Russians. I want to make that fairly clear what we're looking at on a mechanical level, or at least on a mechanical level for our administration currently that's dealing with the situation, and this is why y'all are seeing that we are starting to heighten nuclear readiness. The Russian Federation is starting to act very wildly, and to be quite honest, it's acting in an erratical manner, using IRBMs in a conventional manner, and also explaining to us that they are going to continue to use them that way makes no economic sense whatsoever. whatsoever. We explained this a little while ago on the channel about the use of the Russians firing an ICBM in a conventional role. That does not make any economical sense, and it really doesn't make any economical sense either with an IRBM, which is a little bit shorter in range, but still costs a large amount of money to be able to produce and field a single IRBM. And for this reason, the fact that the Russian Federation is claiming that they're going to continue test firing IRBMs in combat is a very concerning and a very dangerous sort of a statement to make, because there is a lot of different kinds of things that could happen if we're not ready. And allow me to just go through a couple of the possible but highly unlikely scenarios that could happen that would lead the West to be in a very short, a very, I guess you could say, short end of the stick if the situation was to go awry. The Russians could fire an additional 2 more Oreshnik missiles into Ukraine, and then a 4th one could be fired directly into, say, a country like Poland, and there was absolutely no forewarning at all, and they had simply bided their time until they were able to launch a missile, because U.S. forces were largely starting to see, and Western forces in general were largely starting to see, that this situation was going to end up being a norm and end up being the usual. Another situation that we could see is that the Russians truly do just continue to fire Oreshniks only into Ukraine, but eventually one of them actually is carrying a nuclear warhead and ends up slamming down into Ukraine and nuking a large area, possibly killing some U.S. advisors and U.S. personnel that are in the area, as we do understand that there are some U.S. advisors inside of Ukraine, and there may also be an untold number of U.S. military contractors that are also in Ukraine currently at the moment, which may end up being killed if a nuclear blast was to occur. For these reasons, just these few contingencies, the United States has to be prepared to react at any given moment, and the United Kingdom and France largely already are on the continent and pretty much ready, because most of their nuclear arms are currently inside of the United Kingdom or France, or are on board one of their submarines that are currently at sea somewhere within the area. The United States, however, has to be prepared for one of these contingencies if they were to happen, and if we actually had to start conducting retaliatory strikes against the Russian Federation. And for this reason, that's why we're seeing that there is a heightened level of readiness. It does not mean that the United States is scared and the government's going to act erratically and start firing off nukes tomorrow. It does not mean that chat is cooked, and it does not mean that we're in World War III officially, or really at all at the moment. It just means that we are reacting to the Russian Federation and their erratic behavior, and making sure to deter them from future and more wild erratic behaviors by posturing ourselves in a position of strength. That's what we're largely doing.
I just wonder, Enforcer, I wonder if that was the right thing to do, because usually I'm a tit for tat kind of person. If somebody does something to, for example, the United States, then we should respond proportionally and do the same thing back to them. But in this scenario right here, obviously Putin is acting very irrational and very erratic by sending the IRBM into Ukraine, and it's honestly so erratic, I'm not even really sure if we should have done anything to respond to it, because we already had nukes in place to actually strike Russia if necessary, and sort of like engaging in this brinkmanship that we're doing here by potentially sending gravity bombs over to Europe, or at least more of them. It seems to me like we're kind of feeding into Putin's escalatory nature that he's kind of engaging in right now, and maybe the best thing to do, kind of like we discussed last night, was to basically sit back and do nothing and let Putin try his bluffs and don't engage with it. But I'm not really sure, honestly, in my opinion, if this would have been the best thing to do, to start sending more nukes over to Europe.
Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. It's really hard to gauge, and usually this is how nuclear de-escalation eventually happens, is by escalating to the point that both sides see that it's a pretty dangerous kind of a train to be on. It's about to crash, so everyone better try and hop off before it actually crashes, or at least stop the train before it runs into a wall. But a lot of people seem to be having a bit of a question, really, about the whole crux of the matter that the U.S. is reacting to, according to the statements that Putin made today, where he said he's going to continue to test the Oreshnik missiles on Ukraine well on into the future. And it seems as though a lot of people are actually believing that this statement, which most statements Putin makes are largely not true, but a lot of people seem to be believing that this statement in particular is entirely true. And Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about it as well?
All right, so Putin did say today that he was going to continue testing Russia's new IRBM missile on Ukraine, and he made it sound like Ukraine was simply a proving ground or a testing ground, basically for testing weaponry, which is insane because there's a ton of people living in Ukraine, and he's basically making them seem like their lives mean nothing by calling it simple testing of Russia's new weapons. So what are your thoughts? 53% said Putin will 100% do this, it's real, while 21% said only time will tell, and 20% said Putin is simply bluffing about it. And honestly, I'm with the 53%. I think Putin does plan on sending more IRBMs into Ukraine. That sounds insane to say, and I really did not think I was going to be saying this, but it looks like he does plan on sending more of those into Ukraine. But the question is, how many of those does Russia actually have completed and finished and able to be fired at Ukraine? That's currently the question that we do not have answered, and that will pretty much dictate how many more are going to fly into Ukraine. Basically, whatever Russia has in their supplies, that is all they can fire, obviously. So I'm with the 53%. I think Putin is not bluffing on this one. And Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say, in my opinion, I also do not believe that Putin is bluffing on this as well. I believe that Putin is entirely serious about this, considering that there has not really been that major of a reaction to the first Oreshnik launch that has been conducted. It appears that the Russian Federation pretty much has a blank check to continue to fire these things, at least in a kinetic or conventional fashion, into Ukraine. And for this reason, we are going to largely believe that this statement from Putin today is most likely true, and that these IRBM launches are going to continue to happen. This statement was most likely made today by the Russian Federation to pretty much notify the United States, do not panic if we're firing these things into Ukraine, because it's not the beginning of a nuclear war, but we are sending a very strong message that we may start a nuclear war if things keep on going against our favor. And one has to really think, I want to make sure to stop from a moment here, because the news today, and I've got to admit, is fairly concerning. We usually try and downplay things. Things like this are fairly concerning, however, because we are talking about possible nuclear warfare. But one thing that we do have to sit back and remember here is how badly the war is going at this point for this to happen. The Russian Federation has been in a war now for 1,003 days against a nation that was not even known for really even having a military in the first place. They have been in a war now with that country and have ended up being pretty much beaten so badly that the North Koreans are being brought in mass. They're now deploying them pretty much wherever they can to fill in the holes that the Russian army itself cannot fill. The Ukrainians are now able to use Western long-range weapons inside the Russian Federation, and that alone allows the Ukrainians so much more of an ability to hammer the Russian forces that they are so concerned of losing the war at this point, if it kept going in this manner, that they are going to start threatening the Ukrainians with nuclear blackmail and pretty much the entirety of the Western world. And it really is giving us an idea at this point that the Russian Federation on a conventional level is doing abysmally inside of Ukraine alone. And that does once again lead us into another assumption, and while this doesn't matter because the nuclear doctrine by Russia has technically been changed, it does give us the fairly good assumption that NATO would be able to curb stomp the Russian Federation in a conventional war. And that is a good thing in one sense. It's actually very scary in another. We will probably do such a thorough job of obliterating the Russian Federation's armed forces in a conventional war that nuclear weapons would be pulled out practically most likely within weeks of that conflict beginning. There wouldn't even really be that much time for negotiations to begin to end that conflict once it began. So for that reason, we're starting to get an understanding, at least in my opinion, that the Russian Federation is truly at the brink and is highly unstable because their conventional forces practically don't really exist at this point, and that's why they're starting to move heavily into the nuclear threats. If we see... Go ahead.
Also, Enforcer, another thing as well that I'm currently seeing as well is all the current escalations we're seeing are really starting to stack up really quickly that Russia is doing, and I think we're starting to see the fallout here of not making the decision earlier to allow Ukraine to have permission to strike into Russia using those long-range U.S.-made weapons. Because if that would have been done earlier, we could have basically done like a step pattern in how many permissions we were giving Ukraine. Because basically what just happened is we waited to the last second to give Ukraine permission to launch those missiles, and then every other country, the UK and everyone else who had long-range missiles, said simultaneously, go ahead and use them in Russia. So we had all these countries saying this at once, and then that basically caused Russia to go into this panic mode, essentially, to start doing these escalations out of control. So if we would have done this in more of a step pattern, like do them one by one, like first allow them permission to use the ATACMS in Russia, then the Storm Shadows maybe a month or two later, and do it in that way, that would have probably like tamped down the tensions just a little bit. And once again, I know some people are going to say, well, that's basically trying to appease Putin. We have to factor into the equation that we're not trying to let things get so out of hand that the madman starts going so mad that he takes it to the extreme. We don't want that, but we also need to allow Ukraine to win the war as well. So I think this is the aftermath of not giving that permission much earlier.
I would have to agree. But while we may not have given the permission earlier, I will have to say this. Considering how quickly this escalation is happening at the moment, we may see that everyone is pretty much forced into peace negotiations by the beginning of next year. Even if the Russians are wanting to achieve a total victory in Ukraine, no one wants to die. That's the honest reality of it, is that no one wants to see 2/3 of everyone in the Northern Hemisphere dead within a year. And that will happen if this keeps going this direction. The escalations that we're seeing endlessly by the Russians. And while the United States isn't going out of its way to escalate farther than them, we are trying to match them at the moment, and that's going to make the Russians, considering that they are stupid the way they are going to escalate again to outdo the United States, trying to match their current escalation at the moment. So given that in mind, I'm fairly certain at this point we will probably see very serious negotiations being made by the beginning of next year. Regardless whether those negotiations were wanted by either side or not, both sides are going to be understanding it might be better to just be unhappy with the end results than everyone be dead. And that's probably what will end up most likely occurring at this point. Another thing that I do want to say, because some people have been a little bit confused about this, and I'm going to speak about this very clearly because a lot of people are misunderstanding the internal government situation inside the United States. This action, and I'm still going to be within our no politics rule here, but I am going to explain this as clearly as possible because I've seen many misunderstandings about this out there in the world recently. But a lot of people are trying to blame one president or the other, either the current president or the incoming president. And I'm going to just say their names quite clearly here so that way we can make sure not to get people confused and say this very plainly for the situation that's happening right now. Neither the president, the current president, Biden, or President-elect Trump is individually and solely responsible for the incidents that we're seeing at the moment. Both of them have actually been in conjunction and on phone calls recently to figure out and game plan out what the United States' actions will be inside of Eastern Europe to deal with the Russian situation. And both President Biden and President-elect Trump on these phone calls, according to statements from the office of the White House, have both agreed that allowing Ukraine to be able to escalate the conflict further through a position of peace through strength will be a beneficial policy, considering that it largely will force both sides to the negotiating table and may actually allow Ukraine to gain a little bit more than they would otherwise. At least that's the running theory at the moment, and this is why the approval of the Storm Shadows and the ATACMS was done, along with the provision of anti-personnel mines, to be able to allow the Ukrainians, well, really the Russians, to start their escalation as they are right now. This is largely a diplomatic game of a sort, and I once again want to remind everyone of that because I do not want people to be too concerned. This is being done pretty much in the conjunction of the president and the president-elect at the moment to try and see if a way can be brought about, and I'll try and explain this the best I can. They're going to try and ramp up the conflict so badly that the Russians will be scared of what's to come, America will be scared of what's to come, and Ukraine will also be scared of what's to come so badly that everyone actually gets to the negotiating table and irons out a peace. That's largely what's going on right now, and that's why I have to be honest with y'all, if you are getting panicked about this, do not be, because while nuclear weapons are an incredibly dangerous weapon and the usage of them would be serious, most of this is being done in diplomatic leveraging incidents. Like, for example, the United States heightening its nuclear readiness today is to once again add that extra little bit of pressure in the steam to be able to make it to where the pressure ends up building up so badly that both sides actually do want to negotiate. That's largely what's going on at the moment. And so that's why I want to say it's not that concerning. Like, it is concerning sounding, of course, and I do want to make that very clear. But when you actually know the diplomatic mechanisms that are going on behind the scenes, this is largely not that dangerous or that concerning because they are going to start de-escalating at some point in the future, and then we'll see that this largely disappears to the wayside. And to once again give a historical example of that, so that way people know I'm not just talking out of my rear end here, this is the exact same thing that happened in the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is a fairly similar and analogous incident to this, although no one was actually firing dud IRBMs during that incident. Nevertheless, though, many people may know this, and I'll try and explain how this worked in the end, that the United States of America had actually forward deployed nuclear weapons into Turkey during the late 1950s under President Eisenhower. The Soviet Union did request under Nikita Khrushchev for those nuclear weapons to be removed, and the United States denied the request, stating that that was a part of their nuclear deterrence policy. In response to this, the Soviet Union then decided to escalate it even further by requesting that the Cubans allow Russian missile forces, nuclear missile forces, to be stationed inside of Cuba to be able to conduct pretty much the same level of nuclear deterrence against the United States. And then at that point, once nuclear missiles started to arrive inside of Cuba, under the control of Soviet nuclear forces, the United States then panicked because both the Soviet Union and the Russian Federation were on the exact same level, with missiles being quite literally within range of practically everything inside of both the Soviet Union and the United States at the same time. And for that reason, the United States then started to blockade Cuba and stop Soviet vessels from trying to make it to the port of Havana and other ports in Cuba to be able to drop off more arms and provisions to be able to support their nuclear forces that were on the island. That actually ended up getting so severe that a U.S. destroyer ended up depth charging a Soviet submarine and forcing it to surface off of the coast of Cuba, which in itself is quite literally an act of war. And so, with this in mind, and considering that President Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev were both eyeballing a nuclear war that will actually a conventional war that would quickly turn into a nuclear war at that point, the pressure had been ramped up so high that everyone wanted off. The Russians were at that point were not at all wanting to see a nuclear war carried out to its end because of the policy of mutually assured destruction, or the doctrine of mutually assured destruction laid out by the United States. And President Kennedy also did not want to see that happen as well, as the United States and the Soviet Union would equally be destroyed in this exchange. And so for that reason, both of them ended up going to the negotiating table, and the United States withdrew its nuclear weapons from Turkey, and the Soviets withdrew their nuclear weapons from Cuba. That's largely how that worked on a diplomatic level. And while it did look very concerning, and it looked like we were incredibly close to nuclear war, the actions that were taken while being directly hostile towards each other, were eventually ramping up to some sort of a diplomatic cessation of the escalations. And that's what we're believing is happening right here at the moment. Of course, it's very scary and very concerning for a lot of people to watch, but I hope that gives some assuredness to y'all that nuclear conflict is still very unlikely to begin, as this is all a part of diplomatic, I guess you could say diplomatic game playing that's being conducted by both sides. Very scary, but nevertheless most likely necessary. Nevertheless, though, it does seem as though a lot of people are believing at the moment, given this talk on how this side of nuclear diplomacy works, that the U.S. has adjusted its nuclear doctrine to react to Russia's newest threats. And what are a lot of people making of that? Do they think that that is a strong move, especially since we're speaking on a diplomatic level, or is that a very unnecessary and escalatory move that may start to move us even closer to an actual conventional and then nuclear conflict on the European continent, and maybe even eventually on a strategic level? But Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking about this as well?
All right, so about 51% of the audience said it good. We should match Russia tit for tat, while 24% said there's simply no good way to go here, while 16% said the USA is playing into Putin's hands. And on this one, I'm honestly going to be in the minority with the 16%. I think the U.S. is kind of playing into Putin's hands here, because we have to recognize that Putin is acting completely irrationally right now. He's sending an IRBM into Ukraine, which has never happened before in the history of warfare, and he's really going off his rocker, even more and worse than before. So we're also seeing North Korea get involved in this, which makes this a bit of a global thing now. It's turning very much global, which is very concerning to see. So I would say that by upping the ante, by sending more nukes into Europe, that was probably not the wisest thing to do, in my honest opinion. I know a lot of people were like, oh, we want to show Putin, we want to show strength and show this and that. And I typically agree with that 100% of the time, except for this one instance. If there was any instance to cool things down a little bit, now was the time to do it, because now things are starting to run uncontrollably out of hand. And even though it's a lot of scaremongering from Putin, we can't totally discount it to the point where we start acting irrational ourselves. So I'm with the 17%, but Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to be with the 50%. While it does sound concerning, it may even lead to the Russians trying to ramp it up a little bit more. We do know that the Russians are leaving some room right now at the moment to ramp this up to another level. We do know this, and to explain what we were talking about yesterday, to know why there would be a next level before they actually started slinging hash, is that yesterday they called up the United, well, actually it was a few days ago at this point. Let me think here. No, it was yesterday. It was quite literally yesterday, 24 hours ago. They called up the United States right before the launch of the Oreshnik, and they told us that there was going to be a IRBM launched from the Kapustin Yar test range, but it did not have any nuclear warheads on board, and also notified us of the target, which was the city of Dnipro, to let us know that that missile was not going to be flying into Europe itself. And for this reason that they called us, we know that they are creating another level of escalation that they can move into, where they fire an IRBM and they do not call us to lower lower the tensions and let us know exactly what's going on. So for this reason, we do know that the Russians are allowing another level of nuclear escalation to occur, and may even try and cut that level down into even more levels to try and slowly ramp their way up to the max and not get from 0 to 100 immediately. For this reason, I do believe that it is necessary at this moment, considering that the Russian Federation is trying to see if maybe they can put us into a weaker position on negotiations, for us to be able to move these nuclear weapons into Europe at the moment. If we do move more B-61 nuclear bombs into Europe, this will be giving the Russian Federation an idea that we are not that ready to give up just yet on the matter, and for this reason, the Russian Federation will either have to decide whether they are going to be the first ones to go to the negotiating table, or whether they're going to try and ramp it up to the next notch, which is to fire an IRBM without calling the United States to make sure that we know exactly what's going on. So going off of that...
But Enforcer, in reality, though, the only thing I'm missing here is I understand the fact that people want to counter Putin with force and strength, and I'm like I've said, I am typically a huge proponent of that myself, but we already had plenty of nuclear capabilities inside of Europe in many different locations to be able to strike back at Russia if we needed to in a nuclear exchange. Like, we have that capability already there, so there's really no real benefit of sending more nuclear weapons to Europe, except for basically playing right into this crap that Putin is doing, which is escalating to the point of insanity. So to me, I don't see any real practical purpose behind it, except for saying, oh, we did something too and we upped the ante. I just don't see any benefit in it.
Well, I see a little bit of benefit in it, because it's not a direct action against the Russian Federation, but it is showing them that if they start to act too erratically and they end up acting erratically against NATO, it most likely would end up going very poorly for them, because nuclear forces on the European mainland would already be ready. Because, for just an instance here, to explain why the gravity bombs are being moved in, the hypothetical scenario that those would be used for is for tactical nuclear exchanges on an open battlefield in Eastern Europe. And what that is showing is that if the Russian Federation wants to threaten the United Kingdom, which they did yesterday, about some sort of a greater conflict coming to their doorstep, or if they want to threaten Europe as a whole, that there's a greater conflict coming to their doorstep, the United States of America, if for some reason NATO forces were overrun practically immediately, which is highly unlikely, will end up starting to tactically bomb the Russians with nuclear weapons on the battlefield to pretty much completely stop their advance or wipe out any remaining armed forces that they have that would be used in that attack against NATO. So it's actually not directly against what the Russians did with the IRBM launch. It's more so against, it's ramping up against a hypothetical scenario that most likely would not happen, but it still sends a message that the United States isn't going to be backing off at the moment, and it isn't going to be, I guess you could say, stunned by the Russian action and allow for them to continue to escalate in even more erratic manners if for some reason that was being discussed inside of central circles of the Russian government.
Maybe so. I mean, that could be it. Like, obviously, it does have that strength component to it, because when you say, for example, we're moving more gravity bombs, nuclear weapons into Europe, that obviously does carry with it a really serious connotation behind it, because, of course, it's nuclear weapons being moved into another continent. But at the same time, though, I'm just still having to stick to my guns on this one. We already have, like, the ability to wipe Russia off the map if we wanted to with nuclear weapons without moving more over there right now. So, rather than just having an upping of the ante moment here, there's really no real benefit to doing this. So, I mean, I don't know. Like, to me, it's just like, once again, poking the madman to see if he's going to go even crazier at this point, because we can wipe Russia out if we have to, literally right this second, without the new nukes.
Maybe so. And also, really quickly, before we move on from this, I do want to address this, and I'm going to make this very clear in wordage tonight, so I'm not going to be censoring the name of the president or the president-elect. I'm just going to say their names outright. Not condemning or praising either of them, but I will make a fairly neutral and non-political statement. This is not the fault of President Biden. This is not the fault of President-elect Trump. This is actually due to the agreed actions by both President Biden and President-elect Trump, that these actions are being taken currently by the United States of America in improving the Storm Shadow and attack will be used in deep strikes against the Russian Federation, and also the heightened nuclear readiness and the change in nuclear doctrine that has been seen today. That is not being done by President Biden alone, and that's not some sort of a crazy notion that he's just insane or crazy, or that he's pissed off that the Democrats lost and he's wanting to just end up killing everyone. This is something that has been agreed on by both the president and the president-elect. We are not going to be getting into political beating downs here, and on top of that, considering that this channel does remain non-political, we stand by the actions of the president president and the president-elect of the United States of America, considering that they are the leaders of this republic, chosen by the people to lead this nation wherever it may go in the future, considering that those people are there by the will of the people, we have to assume that whatever actions they are taking will most likely be wise in the long run. If they end up being unwise in the long run, well, that would be unfortunate, but we're not going to be here on this channel to start opinionatively making statements on one group or the other, whether their actions were justified or not. These people were elected by the citizens of the republic to represent this nation and represent its actions abroad, and for this reason, we stand by both the actions of the sitting president and the president-elect, and this action in particular was made in conjunction by both of them. And so for this reason, that is why we are not going to be entertaining the weird and completely false political statements that are being made on this channel, trying to blame either the president or the president-elect, because it absolutely makes no sense when you actually know the real information that this is being done in agreement by both of them. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least the best I can, because while a lot of people may be getting scared, and maybe rightfully so, I'd still say that because these people were chosen by the nation, by this republic, to lead this country, that I'm not going to sit here and disagree with their actions. The citizens elected these people. I'm not going to sit here and go against the will of the nation. That's something that I will not do. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least in my opinion, but still, it does seem as though a lot of people are still quite concerned at the moment about the situation, and of course we are trying to make sure to let y'all know that this isn't the end of times. I just want to make that very clear. Until something else happens that we will be waiting for, I'm not going to say yet, but until something else happens, we are not at the end game. Nuclear weapons are not going to be flying tomorrow, and I want to make that very clear. This is a very concerning topic, I know, and when you look at it from the outside, and you look at it from a very surface-level approach, it would look like nuclear bombs might be flying tomorrow. But I can assure y'all, if y'all were to trust me in any statement, nuclear weapons are not going to be flying across the North Pole tomorrow towards the United States and towards the Russian Federation. That will not be happening, and we will most likely see that this will finally get to the diplomatic negotiations at some point here in the future. I just want to try and make sure to keep folks calm on this, because while it's a very serious and concerning topic, we are not at the actual end of the scenario, at least at this moment.
Can you believe, though, like we're discussing like possible nuclear escalations? It's not over something bigger than this. It's literally over Russia trying to take over Ukraine. It's like, it's crazy the fact that Putin is going this far. Like, he is taking the thing to this level, the most extreme level possibly, where nuclear weapons are becoming a normal threat. And now he's launching IRBMs, which are nuclear-capable missiles, at Ukraine. He's doing this all to take that one piece of land, which is right next to his country. Is this really honestly worth all that kind of stuff? This honestly, to me, shows me. I think Putin at this point knows he's made a very big blunder by going into Ukraine, because he's been losing this war right here. And he's realizing that he's put himself in a corner. And now he's starting to act out like he's the animal in the corner. And he sees no way out of this, basically. And right now, he's committing even further to this. And it's showing he can't put his ego aside to walk away from this fight that he should have never started. This guy is going to destroy the entirety of Ukraine if he can't take it, and possibly go even further than that, and potentially start a world war if he keeps dragging other countries like North Korea into it. It's just insane to think he's doing this all over Ukraine. Like, it's really baffling.
It really is baffling. It's pretty bizarre. But one thing I do have to remind y'all is that these actions would not be taken by the Russian Federation if they had the ability to counter Western weaponry being used in deep strikes in the Russian Federation. And this is showing that this, I believe, at this point, now looking at it retrospectively over the past few days, Matthew actually said this behind the scenes. He didn't say this on air, but I do believe that Matthew was right on this, that we have finally found the red line. I do believe that we're at the actual threshold at this point of a red line, because the Russian Federation is going absolutely ham on one thing, that Western weapons are able to strike into Russia. And the only reason why they would go ham on that, and I've got to make this very clear, this is why, they don't have an ability to counter those almost at all. And we're hearing from the Russian Ministry of Defense statements saying that they shot down pretty much all Storm Shadows and all ATACMS, but their actions are showing something completely different. Because if Western weaponry truly posed no threat at all to their conventional ground forces, they would not be escalating to this kind of a level. We have actually seen that the Russian Federation can be defeated, crazily enough, by weapons that are 40 years old here in the West. That is something that is an actual reality. And the conventional forces are so weak at this point and so incapable of actually dealing with the Western world that the only thing that they can do to be able to preserve some of their interests without just being curb stomped by Western weaponry is to start threatening nuclear conflict. Because at that point, if they continue to allow the West, well, really Ukraine, to use Western weaponry, they will end up losing. And I think at this point, that's why they're acting this way. So with that in mind, we now know that we are at the threshold of the red line, and we're going to be inching in baby steps closer and closer, probably over the next 2 months, perhaps, or maybe even the next 3 months, to the actual brink of the red line and going over it. But at this point, I think it's very clear that diplomatic negotiations are going to have to be made. And I want to explain that that isn't something being said because we are scared. It's something being said because there is going to be an inevitable end to this if both sides continue to escalate, and then either the Russians cross our red line or we cross theirs. This will end up in a nuclear strategic exchange in between the Russian Federation, the United Kingdom, France, and the United States, just at a minimum. And with that,
Enforcer, I think, like we've been saying for some time, actually, I've been saying this as well for a long time, that Putin is not going to allow Russia to lose this war. And as much as Ukraine is winning the war, I think Putin will try to resort to these really, really horrific means to try to basically force a win on Russia's side. And at this point, we're really not sure what a win for Russia would look like. It might mean simply ending with peace negotiations, giving a large chunk of Ukraine to Russia. It could be Russia using a nuclear weapon and trying to end the war that way. I'm really having a hard time at this point seeing a scenario where Russia simply withdraws troops and walks away. I don't think that is an actual viable end to the war at this point. And I'm really not sure what else to do here. If I was in the decision-making spot right now and I was trying to counter Putin, obviously Ukraine is like pushing them back. Like they're holding their ground extremely well. Ukraine's fighting very, very good, and we're giving them more weapons to be able to strike into Russia. But even at that, though, Putin's methodology here is basically to start ramping the thing up worse, start firing IRBMs at Ukraine. And at what point does Putin eventually pull the trigger on the ultimate option, which is actually firing a nuclear weapon to get his way? Because I think at this point, nobody is really disputing the fact that Putin is simply just not going to walk away. I don't think he is.
I don't think he is. And also, I see some people saying this in the chat because I'm about to throw out a possible diplomatic off-ramp to this whole deal here. Some people are saying, no, Russia must give back all the land they have in Ukraine. Are you willing to die for that? Like, I'm not asking that as like a threat. I'm asking legitimately, would you be willing to die for that premise? Because if we are saying the Ukrainians must get back all of their land in crime, well, all of their land currently, we will probably see that this thing does escalate into a nuclear conflict that will end up wiping out 2/3 of everyone. And considering that betting against the odds isn't really a good thing, you're probably going to end up dying for that inch of land. There's not even really going to be anyone left alive by that point to reclaim the land. So going off of that, we need to understand that when the diplomatic negotiations come around, because at this point we know, because of how quickly things are ramping up at this point, they will, and they are going to happen, we are going to see that the Russians will keep some land, but Ukraine will be able to get some of it back. Of course, in a compromise like this, both sides understand that they would rather not die, so the Russians will give up some things, and we will give up some things as well, just to make sure to try and keep the peace. That's what we are understanding at the moment, at least. And another thing that we do understand is that the Russian Federation will not be able to pose a significant threat to NATO from this point forward. They are threatening nuclear conflict at the moment because even Ukraine, just using a hodgepodge of Western weaponry, would be able to win against the Russian Federation's armed forces if this war goes on maybe another 2 years. So going off of that, we know that they will never be able to pose a threat to NATO, and that Putin's imperial ambitions are pretty much going to die most likely in the Donbass and Crimea where they are right now. So given that, we will have to see what the diplomatic negotiations go into. And I see a lot of people saying they would, and I find this very interesting, that they would die over this strip of land. But I want to make this very clear, because I don't know if some people are getting the gravity of this one here. No one's going to be around to even get that land when the nuclear exchange is over. I don't think anyone's getting that. The Russians are not going to be there, but we're not going to be there either. It's going to be a desolate hellscape. That's what it's going to end up becoming. And so I don't know why people would say this, because at the end of the day, we do have to realize that we're not trying to destroy the entire Western world, well, really the entire Northern Hemisphere, over a thing that could be resolved diplomatically. Is it going to go exactly our way? Probably not. But it will still go a way where where everyone's largely unhappy, including the Russians, and also no one's dead. Well, at least everyone who isn't dead yet is not yet dead. That's the truth behind this thing, because that is kind of what we're dealing with at the moment. And I just saw someone say, Andrew, you're not for Ukraine. That's a very interesting statement right there, because I want to make this fairly clear. If being for Ukraine means that quite literally everyone in the Northern Hemisphere has to die, I don't really think that is a logical sort of an assessment of the situation. Because if we worked off of that kind of a mindset for, say, the entirety of the Cold War, everyone would have been dead by now. So we're trying to figure out and gameplay this the way we can, and I see some people wanting to insist that now Putin is only simply playing games here, but if we continue to believe that he's playing games, one day this may actually be a real nuclear weapon, and then we're going to be looking down a nuclear conflict in the face. And if any of you end up dying, which most of you probably will, along with Matthew and me included, the few of y'all that will remain will have wished that that had not happened. That's generally what people on the diplomatic level are going to have to deal with here when making up their mind or making decisions, because decisions cannot be made to the point that it leads to the destruction of the entire Northern Hemisphere. And also...
Well, Enforcer, honestly, I take a different approach to it. To me, I think what the current situation is basically telling me, and I've been trying not to say this on the air, is I don't want to fearmonger. Like, that's my objective. My objective is not to get on here and say things to make people get concerned, upset, or fearful, because that is not our objective here. But the way I see it is basically, I think we're coming to a point where the West is about to have to make a decision. Are we going to fight Russia? Because it looks like that might be the only option left here, is the West going directly up against Russia in a direct conflict to bring this thing to a stop? Or are we going to let Putin basically force a win in Ukraine using nukes or some other way like that, or at least the threat of nukes, to take Ukraine and then potentially move on beyond Ukraine? Because if he's willing to go into Ukraine and take land that does not belong to him, that indicates he's willing to go beyond Ukraine and maybe onto a NATO country or a former Soviet bloc country and move on from Ukraine. So to me, it's basically crunch time in my mind. It's either a time we're going to have to decide, are we going to stand up and fight Putin directly, or are we going to take the risk, let him possibly take Ukraine, and then we're in a really bad fix.
And that's what I would largely have to agree with as well. And I see a lot of people who are diehard. And I want to make this clear as well, because I do want to get you all this little statement, because this was a fairly interesting one that was made, and it was made last week, apparently, on the last map. So let me go grab that one really quickly. And let me see here. We need to go to Google My Maps. Because I hate to say this for a lot of people who are adamant that Ukraine must get back all of their land through force of arms and the war must keep going on until they do that. The problem is that no one actually believes that's possible anymore, including Zelenskyy. So let me go get you all this map right here. This is last week's map, and we're going to go to this statement that was actually made by Zelenskyy. So this is the actual direct quote that was made by Zelenskyy last week. "We cannot spend dozens of thousands of our people so that they perish for the sake of Crimea coming back." So it's very clear at this point that Zelenskyy as well is also seeing that there is no point where the war can keep on going for another 3 years and then they eventually get Crimea back. Just on an actual physical level, on a conventional conflict, Ukraine is apparently seeing that that may not be possible. And then on a nuclear level, and a strategic level for that matter, this may not be possible, because if we give the Ukrainians enough of an ability to beat the Russians badly enough to get back this land by force, that may end up pushing it into a nuclear conflict. It may be a bit of an unpopular thing to say, but there probably will have to be some form of concessions given at this point for us to see that this doesn't end up devolving into a full-on nuclear conflict. Maybe not popular, but it is most likely going to be the realistic approach that is going to be taken. And it seems as though a lot of people are believing that that may actually be the case, because a lot of people are wondering, is there any possible scenario for Putin to withdraw his troops and just entirely lose the war? And it seems as though a lot of people are believing that the Ukrainians, not the Ukrainians, but the Russians will refuse to lose at this point, considering the erratic and wild actions that they're taking at the moment. And so, Matthew, what are people thinking about this, and what are you thinking as well?
All right. So on this question right here, once again, the question is there any possible scenario for Putin to withdraw his troops and lose the Ukraine war, meaning voluntarily lose the war? And 59% said no, Putin will refuse to lose, while 31% said yes, it's still very possible, and 10% were unsure. And honestly, I am solidly within the 59%. I think Putin is going to refuse to lose the war. I think if the war were allowed to take its natural course, then Russia would 100% lose this war because they are losing on the front lines and they are losing behind the lines as well with their economy and several other things also. But Putin is not going to allow this war to take its natural course. He's going to try to force a win through some other coercive means, meaning nuclear weapons or something like that. And he's going to also start ramping up his rhetoric and also his actions against the West until eventually he hopes that people will back down. So we're basically, like I said before, in a scenario where we have to either say we're going to stand up now and fight Russia and end this threat, because honestly, to me, the threat is not just Ukraine. The threat is much larger than that. The Axis powers, meaning North Korea, China, Russia, Iran, they are getting out of control, and they're getting rapidly out of control, not just in Ukraine. For example, look at China and Taiwan. There are so many things that this group of Axis powers, which has become very consolidated over the past couple of years while this war has been happening. And I think, like the generals have been saying, the global war is coming up in the next 5 to 10 years. And I think it's basically knocking on our doorstep at this point. So not trying to fearmonger here, but I'm going to say that it's about time that we take a stand on this issue and basically let Putin know, are you willing to die over Ukraine, or are you willing to die over this entire situation? Because that's where we're at. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to agree. I think that it is time to make a stand, but at the same time, I've got to make it very clear, when we make the stand, we cannot be as dog-headed of saying we must have total victory or no victory. We will have a victory, that is for sure, but we cannot have a total victory. And if the Russians continue to insist, and I got to make this very clear, because I'm not saying, and I think a lot of people are trying to strawman this here so that way they can end up just getting pissed off at us. So allow me to explain. I'm not saying here that the Russian Federation is going to get everything they want, and we're just going to give them that, and it's going to be peace in our time, like Chamberlain said. Absolutely not. But one thing I am saying here, however, is that we cannot achieve a total victory in Ukraine if it means nuclear devastation, because that's not a victory, that's a total defeat. Who the hell is even going to be there to get the land? The Russians will not be, we will not be. Who in the world has it at that point? Quite literally no one has it. So what was the point of that? It didn't achieve anything. We didn't end up winning. They didn't end up winning. So what was the point of this? That's the whole point I'm trying to get at here. So with that in mind, we have to move into a new phase where we know that some concessions will be made, but we're not going to give them everything they want, and we're also not going to get everything we want as well. We will get back some land inside of Ukraine. We will most likely get Ukraine inside of NATO, but the Russians will most likely keep Crimea, which is a really kind of, it's aggravating, I will admit, because that's kind of the entire thing that the West is focused on, is getting Crimea back into Ukraine's hands and really into NATO's hands. But I think the Russians will quite literally start a nuclear conflict before they give back Crimea at this point. I think Zelensky's thinking that, and a lot of people are thinking that as well, and that's why we're seeing that that's kind of being a bit abandoned at this point. And also, Matthew, what do you got to say?
All right, so I saw a really good point here in the live chat from You're Taking My Life, who's a longtime channel legend. They said, isn't this almost exactly what happened in one of the prior world wars, appeasing Germany until they just kept going and going? And that's actually a really good example, by the way, because Germany, when they invaded Poland, everyone said, oh, look, they're invading Poland. Maybe it's just about Poland, maybe. It could just be Poland. And sure enough, it wasn't just about Poland. It was about the entire world. And, you know, this situation here is honestly analogous to me with Russia trying to go into Ukraine and take it. And some people out there are saying, oh, no, it's just Ukraine. Like, we're not going to all die about Ukraine. Who die for Ukraine? It's just one country. It's not just one country, in my opinion. It's about something much larger than that. And I think Putin is looking to reestablish the former Soviet bloc, personally. I think that's been his goal the entire time, in my opinion. And he may or may not attack NATO next, but he will go for another country after this, because his objective is to get more land for Russia. And I'm not really sure what's motivating him at this point. I'm not really sure if it's something personal to him or what it is, but he is determined to keep going with this. And I don't think Ukraine's going to be the last one. I think he's going to keep going beyond that. So I agree with You're Taking My Life. It kind of is analogous to the start of the other world wars.
And also, really quickly, I also have to say, Mandy, I don't really believe this is analogous to the beginning of World War II. There's a lot of historical differences there that don't really exist now. For one, everyone was allowing Germany to take things through diplomatic victories. There was no conflict that was happening before World War II began in 1939 in Europe. The Germans said, we want to annex Austria, and everyone just agreed, we'll let them have it, and they annexed it. Then they said, we want to annex the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia. Then they annexed that without an issue. Then they annexed the rest of the Czech Republic and then created Slovakia as a puppet state. It was only when they claimed that they wanted Danzig that an actual war began. But everything that the Germans did or gained, and Neville Chamberlain claimed was a peace in their time, was quite literally and truly appeasement 100%. There was absolutely no conflict or threats of conflict that was made over the Germans claiming more and more territory inside of Central Europe. There is a difference here. A war is going on right now, and we did not appease the Russians by just letting them have what they want in Ukraine from the outset. We have supported the Ukrainians through and through with about $130 billion of military support and economic support from the United States alone. We have allowed them to pretty much use any and all of our weapons from 40 years ago in any and all capacities that they could wish to use them in, which we've been seeing so far. We have given the Russians 3 years of bloody fighting inside of Ukraine that has produced around a 750,000 wounded and killed, and the Russians have got absolutely nothing to show for it at this point, but their army is practically crippled and dying off every single day. They're having to pull in North Koreans because their army is simply not the size or has the ability to mobilize large enough to be able to continue on the conflict, and the Russians are now so panicked that they're having to move into nuclear threats to be able to try and achieve something. This has not been appeasement. Like, appeasement is giving up stuff off of the bat. And we did not give up anything off of the bat. We have been giving Ukraine everything we can to allow them to fight against the Russian Federation for 3 straight years. And I do believe that Western support for Ukraine should never cease. However, when we're talking about this is now getting to the point where it's about to flood over into a broader world war, which will not end in a good way. And that's just a definitive certainty. That's why a third world war has not been fought yet since the end of World War II, is because everyone is nuclear armed, and that will not end with anyone winning. That is something that we have to keep in mind. This is not appeasement. At all. If we were to start moving into a diplomatic concessions or negotiating table and start talking this out. This is.
But Enforcer, the only thing though, like to counter the point just a little bit, is if we agree that Putin is not going to voluntarily lose this war and he will try to force a win through some other means, like for example the nuclear threats or something like that, then it only leaves us with 2 options here. Either we can appease Putin by giving up some of Ukraine's land, and we don't know how much land we'd have to give up for Ukraine to end the war. We don't know what that would take. It could be the entire thing. That might be all Putin's willing to accept. We just don't know yet. Or the second option is the West can say, we're not tolerating you taking any land whatsoever, and we're going to draw a line for once and say, if you cross this line right here and keep taking or try to take more of Ukraine or any of it, then we're going to be in a direct conflict with you. Let's turn the tables here for a second. Instead of Putin issuing the threats, maybe the West should say, we're going to put our foot down now, and if you go any further, then we're going to come after you instead.
This is how I'd have to deal with that, because obviously we're not going to sit there and say, what do you want, Russia? You want half of Ukraine? You want to be a puppet state? Have at it? Absolutely not. We're not going to allow them to gain anything they haven't gotten so far. So if they said, we want everything east of the Dnipro, we say go to hell. That's just ridiculous. And at some point, I do have to say here, if they are going to only go with total victory and that's it, then we have no choice but to die on this hill. Even if it does turn into a nuclear war, that's the only choice we have. But if we go to the negotiating table and we say, are you willing to give up some stuff? And we will give up some stuff. So, for example, if we say the Ukrainians withdraw from Kursk, they get back Zaporizhia and Kherson, but they keep Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea, that would be more reasonable. But if the Russians said, we want total victory and we want everything in Ukraine, that is an absolute no. And even if that turned into a nuclear war at that point, that's what happens. But we also can't go to the negotiating table as dog-headed as the Russians and then say, we want you entirely out of Ukraine, kiss our ass or we'll kill you. Because then at that point, both sides are going to push this thing into a nuclear conflict and it's going to end poorly. So if anyone was misunderstanding my statement to say, well, let's give the Russians whatever they want, absolutely not. But at the same time, though, there has to be an understanding that we have to move forward in this scenario with a decent understanding that there is going to most likely be a compromise at this point, because they can nuke us just like we can nuke them. They also understand that as well. And if you're not even alive to claim the victory, is the victory even won? This is going to end up in a total defeat at this point. So they either need to get their head off their ass and understand that they will maybe be able to keep some of what they got, but not all of it. But we also have to understand that we're not going to get everything that we want either at this point. That's what we're
But are we
doing.
just pushing off the inevitable at that point? Because even if we give, let's say we give Putin what he wants. Let's say we give him the part of Ukraine over there closest to his border. Let's say we give him a huge chunk over there and say, is this good for you? And Putin says, yes, that'll be fine. And then he goes and takes the land. Everything calms down for a bit. And in the background, Russia rebuilds their military. They recruit more people. They better train them this time. And they get 100% more well-armed than they were the first time through whatever means, maybe with the help of China. And then they return in a couple of years and they reinvade Ukraine. And this time with a little bit more training, a little bit more experience, whatever that's worth at this point. The Russians don't ever really gain much experience at all because they all die pretty quickly. But if they gained any experience whatsoever, now they try to steamroll Ukraine faster and try to blitz it this time, and then we're in the same situation just a couple years down the road. That's probably what would happen in that case.
Well, that's why in this scenario, we would say that Ukraine is going to end up becoming a part of NATO. Like, that will be a certainty. Like, the Russians might be able to get some territory, but we are going to get Ukraine in NATO, because that's a guarantee. And so the Russians can sit there and they can train and they can rebuild and they can rearm all they want. But then at the same time, you're dealing with, if you do anything else again to Ukraine, now it's an Article 5 provocation with NATO. So then their hands are completely tied in the future on that reason. And also, I got to put this out there. If they attack NATO, the gloves are off. Even if it turned into a nuclear war at that point and they started the conflict, the gloves are entirely off. That's how that would work. Like I'm trying to say here, and I don't know if I'm getting this across, we want to try and see if we can compromise with them to avoid a nuclear conflict, but if they are absolutely foreign to the idea of compromise, a nuclear conflict will happen, and they will end up losing that. And we will also end up losing as well, but we will sure as hell get them in the end. That's what we're dealing with right here. We want to see, because this is what this is, we want to see if there's a way off of this hellscape, or this hell ramp that we're on right now that's going to ramp this thing up into a nuclear conflict. If they do not want off the ramp, we are going to nuke them. And they're also going to nuke us in exchange. But right now we're trying to see, is everyone going to die, or is there a way off of this whole thing where most everyone does not end up dying? And that's what we're trying to see right now. And I see some people saying that's appeasement. I'm sorry to a lot of people who don't get this. There is no such thing as a total victory in a nuclear age. Like, if you are a historian at all, there has never been one. That's why North Korea exists. If you don't know, is because even back in 1950, we understood, unless if we are willing to nuke the Soviets, or really just nuke the Reds, and have the Reds nuke us back, we are not going to be getting rid of North Korea. That's what we knew. And that's why we went and had to end up compromising and having the Korean Peninsula split in two. That's why the entirety of the Korean Peninsula isn't the Republic of Korea, it's the Republic of Korea and the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. That's why that's a thing. There's also a whole bunch of other things that people may not know that were a result of the Cold War. For example, the founding of the Islamic Republic. It only exists today because the Soviet Union came in after it came into being, and we said we were going to overthrow their government, and came in and said, if you do that, we will escalate this into a full-on conventional war. And we knew that if it moved into that level, we would stop the Russians, well, the Soviets at that point, badly enough, it would turn into a nuclear conflict, and there would be no winning. So while it sounds to some people who may not understand how modern diplomacy works, that giving any kind of concession is appeasement. We don't live in a world anymore like World War II, where you can crush the Nazis, wave a flag over the Reichstag, and declare total victory. That just doesn't happen anymore. If the Russians believe that they live in that kind of a world, they're going to get themselves killed very easily by nuclear hellfire from us. If we believe we will live in that kind of a world, we are going to get killed in a Russian hellfire pretty quickly. This is something that I've got to make very clear, because if you are, and I don't mean to say this offensively, but if you're amateur enough in modern diplomacy to think that there is such a thing as a total war, a total victory in a total war between two nuclear powers, you have apparently not been paying attention since 1945. There is no way that can happen.
Or you could try, like, for example, if you wanted to take this approach, which is honestly, I'm not saying I necessarily fully support this approach. It's still like really not a good option here, but you essentially could play nuclear chicken and basically see which one of these forces is willing to actually back down, because if you still have mutually assured destruction, which we still do have in place, Russia has a lot of nuclear weapons, the US has a ton of nuclear weapons as well. Each country would be destroyed. So if the United States suddenly told Russia, we've had enough of this, get your people out of Ukraine right now in the next month, or we're going to be in a direct conflict with you and we're going to be fighting directly. Which one would back down? Would Russia actually go and destroy the entire world over Ukraine, or would they actually back down? Now, I think that's a question that might not be as straightforward as some might think.
Maybe so. And also, I'm seeing a lot of people bringing up a topic on that, Matthew, in the chat. I saw some people saying, let's see here. No one said total victory. Well, Sean, here's the thing. I just read that from Sean M. Interesting point. But here's the thing, though. If people are saying, and this is what some people are saying, is that I'm claiming we can't get back everything in Ukraine. Some of it will have to be given up in this scenario, because at this point, it's either we give up a little bit and get back some, or we end up getting nuked and we get nothing and they get nothing. And there's no win for anyone here. It ends up being a lose-lose for everyone involved. So with that in mind, people are saying that, no, we have to have a total victory. The Russians have to be pushed entirely out of Ukraine, considering that they invaded Ukraine with a specific war goal of claiming pretty much the entirety of Ukraine. We can't even give them a piece of it. We would rather have a nuclear conflict than deal with any kind of a compromise where we largely win, but we end up losing a few things that turn this from a total victory to just a victory. That's what a lot of people have been saying, and a lot of people have been claiming that I'm specifically supporting appeasement now, because I'm saying that we can have a victory, but we can't have a total victory. That's what has been said in the chat tonight. And that's what I'm trying to make a lot more clear here, is that we can have a victory. We've already had one, if you think about it quite realistically. The Russians have been whipped so badly in this war that Storm Shadows and ATACMS landing in Russia scares them enough that they're going to start nuking people over it. That lets us know we have won, because they will not have a military that is of a fighting standard for the next 15 years. And by the time that next 15 years passes, Putin will be dead. And there will be a new leader of Russia that may not be on the same kind of a war path that Putin is on right now. And so we have completely avoided having 2/3 of everyone in the Northern Hemisphere killed, and he's dead now, and there's a new leader of Russia that may be completely different. We will still be able to ensure that Ukraine gets into NATO. We will also be able to ensure that Ukraine gets some of their land back, but they will not be able to get all of it back. And for that reason, some people want to say that's appeasement. I'm saying we can win. We will win. We've largely already won. To be entirely honest with y'all, we could leave the front lines where they are right now, and at least in the West sense, if Ukraine gets into NATO, it's a win. And honestly, in Ukraine's sense, it's also a victory as well, because they survived, which was not supposed to happen. But I'm not going to take that victory at face value. We are going to get land back. It's going to most likely be Kherson and Zaporizhia. We are not going to allow the land bridge to exist. But we can't get all of it back, because that's going to be total victory. And if we were dog-headed enough to go for a total victory, that will end up surmising into a total defeat because of mutually assured destruction for both them and us. And so that's what I'm trying to make clear right here. I'm not saying let's give everything to the Russians. Absolutely not. That is not in support of American and Western interests, and I will not stand for that a single day. If we were going to work off of that metric, we will end up nuking them, and we will end up losing, but we will end up losing and making our final hour our finest hour. But at the same time, however, if we are to sit here and want to see this victory realized and the Western world be around to celebrate this victory, we must understand that there will be some minor concessions given to the Russians, because otherwise we will not have any victory. We will only both suffer total defeat. So I hope that addresses that fairly well, at least the best I can. But that's largely what we're going to be dealing with on a diplomatic level. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And while we have hardly gotten on to any other news at all, Matthew, I understand that there are a load of interesting questions that we have seen in the chat. And so what do we got, Matthew?
All right. And our very last poll question here on this topic is we have to move on at this point. We've been like rabbit holing on this one for ages. But our last poll question says, if the USA told Russia to leave Ukraine or face a direct conflict with the West, what happens? So 53% said Russia would go to war with the USA over that red line, while 23% said Russia leaves Ukraine reluctantly, and 15% said this is a question for madmen. And honestly, this is a question for madmen. There's no way around it. This is a very interesting question to say the least. And honestly, it's a question which we might find the answer to maybe in the next year or so. I'm kind of hoping it doesn't come down to that, but we might be looking at finding out that answer sooner than later. So it really is a question for madmen. But honestly, I have no clue. Like, this is a question here that I wouldn't even have a clue which way to go on. Because if the entirety of the West, which is basically the USA, because they lead the West at this point, if they said, Russia, you better back down or else, or we're going to go to war with you, that would be a tough one. Like, for Russia to say, oh, we're going to just, like, go down with a ship for this one, that would be the utmost crazy. I'm not sure if they'd even go that far. But at the same time, I just don't have a clue. I'll be honest with you. I don't really have a clue on this one. So I'm going to have to leave this as a toss-up. But Enforcer, what say you?
I would have to say it's a toss-up as well. We've never even seen that happen before to know what would happen. Because, actually we do know what happened with that, though. Because, the president-elect did call up the Russian Federation, from what we understand, and did issue pretty much a threat like that. And they pretty much just tried to ignore it and shrug it off because they were scared of what that would really mean. Not that the president-elect is in any position to command troops into war at the moment anyways. He's not the president yet until January. But that is still a very interesting thing to think about, though, because it did happen, and it looks like they just tried to shrug it off and ignore it, because the reality is that they would have to either face that down and end up knowing that they would start losing in the nuclear conflict will happen immediately, pretty much within weeks, or they would have to just completely submit to whatever the United States wanted, one or the other. So I would have to say I'm a little undecided on that, because while we do have a little bit of a precedent, at least with that phone call, we really don't know how that would actually pan out when it is in real practice. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least in my opinion. But with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so our first super chat question here of the night is going to go to none other than Hokey Redneck, who's a longtime channel viewer, and thank you very much, Hokey, for the very generous $100 support, and we appreciate it very much. And he says, do you think the UK will scramble a second boomer? And I believe they only normally have one on station at a time, and I don't know if they have enough ICBMs to stock two, though.
I believe that they have a couple of nuclear submarines at sea at any given time, from what I understand, at least according to what I heard about 2 or 3 years ago. So there should be a couple at sea currently to be able to conduct some form of nuclear deterrent. But if the United Kingdom is seeing that a nuclear conflict is inevitable, they will send out all of the submarines, regardless of their condition, to be ready to fire off those nuclear weapons if necessary. With that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least the best I can at the moment. And also, let's see here. I see a lot of people, Matthew, saying some very interesting things about us now that we have made some statements that are founded in reality. But it is a very interesting thing to see, because I've got to be honest, and this isn't directed at really a lot of people, it's directed at a few. But if you are goofy enough to want to get everyone killed to where no one can win something, did you win it? That's what I'm keep on trying to ask you here, to some people, is that you're trying to equate us winning a conflict, but having to just compromise a few things to the Russians to appeasement like Neville Chamberlain, where stuff was literally given up without a shot, like the Czech Republic and also Austria. That doesn't make any sense. You're trying to equate two things that aren't even parallel to each other. And one thing that I'm wanting to say here, because now that we're on this topic, I will say this truthfully. If we were trying to avoid this entirely, we would have stood up for Ukraine when we saw the Russians building up forces along their border in 2021 and 2022. That's what we would have done, and that would have avoided the conflict entirely, because we would have moved the red lines to, if this war even begins, nukes will fly. So, do you want to die? That was what we should have done. We didn't do it. Generally, to be entirely honest, the U.S. government was asleep at the wheel at the time, but they were asleep at the wheel with a deliberate purpose because of what had happened in Afghanistan, which left a sour taste in people's mouths for foreign affairs. So we were just trying to see if nothing would happen. Then something happened. Now we have a situation to where we are dealing with this. Because, to be entirely honest, for example, some people are saying, if you give Russia land in Ukraine, they're going to take more. If you give a mouse a cookie, he's going to want milk. And that's not the case. Because in NATO, there's a little bit of a different metric. If the Russians start building up forces along Estonia's border, we threaten to nuke them off the bat. Or we threaten to kill them. That's a pretty straightforward thing. There is no, well, we might give away Estonia. There is, we will kill you if you step across this line. If you step across this border, you will be dead. That's the metric there. That's the warning that's issued, and that's the red line. But with Ukraine, however, we didn't do anything to really stop the war from starting. And we could have easily done that if we had directly gotten involved. Hell, if U.S. forces had just flooded across the border in the later part of 2021 and had been there as quote-unquote peacekeepers, that would have stopped the conflict entirely from happening in the first place, to be entirely honest with you all. And then we would have moved immediately to the negotiating table, and there would have been no war if we had acted with strength from the onset. We did not. And so now we are trying to work from a position of peace through strength after a war has begun. And so now we're having to deal with, well, we can't stop this war from happening in the first place, and we can achieve total victory where we push the Russians entirely out of Ukraine now, because now the war is actually on, and they will start nuking if they don't get something. So we can get back some things. We have won in the large part, but we can't get back everything in Ukraine. So we can get back maybe half of the territory that the Russians control right now, but we can't get back everything because the nukes will fly. So if we're talking about this retrospectively, this entire thing could have been avoided. But we're not talking about it retrospectively, and we have to play the cards that were dealt. And so as a leader, you don't act like an idiot and say, let's start nuking everyone and get everyone killed to where there's nothing to win. You say, given the cards we're dealt with right now and the messed up situation that we're actually in at the moment, how in the world do we win this conflict in a way where the West survives and to be able to live to see a victory? That's what we're dealing with right now.
I mean, that's true. That is the option we're facing. But honestly, in my opinion, pretty much every single one of the options that we could take, like, for example, call it appeasement, call it whatever you want. If we were to say, let's give Putin some land, that option right there does carry some very significant risk with it, because if Putin is allowed to rebuild his army and then reinvade, that could be a worse situation. Also, if we do say we're not allowing Russia to go any further and we're going to put our foot down and draw a red line, like a hard red line, and Russia needs to get out of Ukraine, that obviously carries with it some massive risks as well. Honestly, all the options are not looking too great right now, and it's a gamble any option you take. And right now, the unfortunate part is whoever's having to make that decision is basically gambling with everybody's lives, which is what makes the decision really hard. And I don't know at this point if there is a right answer to this situation. I think someone's just going to take their best stab at it, try to avoid, obviously getting us all killed. That's the objective. We want to try to not get as many killed as possible. But I'm not sure if there's a way to totally walk out of the situation unscathed with no one taking losses at this point.
Yeah, that's the thing. If you say that's appeasement, I'm not going to lie, you don't even know what the hell appeasement is. And also, if you're saying that we can destroy Russia's nuclear abilities in minutes and not even get scathed in that kind of a conflict, you're also stupid. I hate to say that, I'm going to have to be honest there. Because if that was the case, don't you think we would have already done that? Don't you think, if we were able to that boldly face down the Russians to where we literally destroy their nuclear abilities in minutes, to where they can't even strike at anyone, why in the world would we have not threatened to go into a conventional war with Russia already over the Ukraine war and just wiped out their nuclear abilities and won the war in a total victory? Why in the world wouldn't we have done that? That's because that's fanciful. That's like the Russians saying that they can destroy the entire world in a nuclear hellfire and not even get their shoes wet in a puddle of mud, because that's not how it works. There isn't really a way to deal with an intercontinental ballistic missile barrage effectively. Even in the West, while we have systems like Aegis ashore, they're not going to be able to shoot down all of them. And so that's why, on that note, that's why we haven't done that. Because if you sat there and you had the ability to destroy Russia's nuclear arsenal and then just steamroll them in a conventional war, why wouldn't we threaten that already? We could have easily done it and won. It would be like the damn Gulf War at that point, really. And so I hope that does address that fairly well. But I got to ask some people who are saying we don't know what we're talking about to have some freaking sense. Because, I mean, your arguments can be defeated with just a simple question like that. Because if it was that easy, it would have already been done. Like we did with Iraq in the Gulf War. It was quite an easy thing. We didn't have to think about that much because they didn't have a nuclear weapon, and we could just curb stomp them conventionally. With the Russians, we can't because we don't really have a way to destroy their nuclear abilities in minutes. Otherwise, we would have done it. So with that, I hope that does address it the best we can, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat here is going to go to none other than Sinful J, who's also a longtime channel legend and puts in a $50 donation. And thank you very much, Sinful J, for that support, and it's very much appreciated. And they said the best war news out there in LSA.
Hey, and thank you so much for enjoying the news that we put out on this channel, and long live the Lee Spring Army, and thank you so much once again for support. and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it was not for folks like you, we would not be able to make this thing possible and keep it running. And I gotta say, thank you so much once again for the support, and thank you for the kind words as well, because your support helps this channel to keep on running day in and day out. And so with that, thank you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
And our last one of the segment goes to James Hughes, who puts in a 50 as well. And thank you very much, James, for that support also, and helping to keep the lights running, or the lights on, actually, and the coffee brewing. And James says, do you think the F-15 or F-22 could shoot down the Russian IRBM? And if I remember right, the F-15 Eagle did a low-orbit space kill.
Technically, we can, but it requires us to be really close either to the boost or just the post-boost phase. Although the post-boost phase at that point, it's largely tougher to intercept. The mid-course phase is really difficult to intercept, and the terminal phase is possible to intercept, but it has a higher chance of not being intercepted than being intercepted. Like, for example, in Ukraine, we've seen that the Patriot can intercept the Kinzhal and the Zircon. Most importantly, the Kinzhal doesn't really matter because that's a modified Iskander. The Zircon truly is a brand new hypersonic missile from what we understand. So with that in mind, from what we've heard from the Ukrainians, it seems as though their interception success rate with a Patriot battery against a Zircon in its terminal phase is somewhere around 45%. So we're still shooting against the odds there. Even in that scenario, shooting down a Zircon, which is just a hypersonic short-range ballistic missile, it's still a 45% chance. It's not even over a half majority chance. So with that in mind, we would be able to shoot down some of them, but we wouldn't be able to shoot down all of them. So instead of having 400 ICBMs making their way to America, let's just say off of this metric, instead of having 400 of them make it to the United States, only 200 of them make it. But 200 of them making it is enough to wipe out, at least over the course of the next year or two after the bombs have fallen, about 50% of the U.S. population, which is about 170 million people. So with that in mind, that is still largely a defeat. We would definitely, I want to make this clear, the Russians have no way to intercept an incoming ICBM from the United States, from what we understand. Their weapon systems are just not even close to doing that. So we would wipe out, in the end, about 2/3 of their people, and a nuclear exchange, they would wipe out about half, at least going off of what I'm saying right here, but that still isn't winning. Half of a population of a nation wiped out, that country ceased to exist at that point. The government has collapsed, most industries in the economy has collapsed, and you're living in the Middle Ages at that point after that exchange. So that's still a defeat, but we could shoot down a good amount of those incoming missiles, at least a little less than half of them. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Also, by the way, that's not exploring at the moment. That's just talking about applying that statistic of the Patriot system against the Zircon to F-22s and F-35s, trying to intercept a ICBM with an AIM-120, which would be pretty tough to pull off. But that's also not talking about the Aegis Ashore systems inside of Eastern Europe, and also all of the other air defense systems that we have, like the THAAD, which does have a higher interception rate in exo-atmospheric incidents. So with that, I hope that does address that at least the best I can, in my opinion and from what I would know. But a huge thanks once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because it is folks like you who help to make this thing possible and help us to keep this thing rolling. And so with that, it is time for us to move on into the rest of the news that we have tonight. We have a lot of it, and honestly very little time to cover it. So moving on into the rest of the news that we were able to see a Storm Shadow flying on its way towards Marino the other day, which is pretty cool because it was just out there. There it goes.
Dang, man, look at that.
That thing is zipping, man. It's close to supersonic. It's just right on the threshold. And here comes the second.
Certainly not a normal day on the farm, that's for sure.
Absolutely not. And there's the second one right there. And those things are zooming. And that's the end of the clip right there, but still very interesting to see and very good to know that the Ukrainians are able to use those Storm Shadows effectively. It is really cool to see them. But moving on from that, we were also able to hear that the Verkhovna Rada sessions inside of Kyiv have been canceled, as the Ukrainian Verkhovna Rada is concerned that the building will be hit directly by the Russians in the next few days. It's over this reason they're keeping all of the Verkhovna Rada members out of the building, so that way if it is hit, they aren't getting killed. We also got to hear that the Ukrainians are eyeballing the THAAD launcher to be able to try and defend their skies. That will most likely not happen. We explored that a lot more in today's short war summary, but this will most likely not happen at all for national security reasons. Still, they are trying to consider it. Moving on from that and into our location unknowns, we were also able to see a very interesting Spanish armored car called the VAMTAC. We have never seen this thing before. It almost looks like a really souped up Humvee, and it is actually pretty cool. We've actually been able to see here the mortar carrier version of the armored car. Pretty cool overall, and great to know the Spanish are providing a pretty niche kind of a system that allows for the mortars to also do the shoot and scoot as effectively as the other forms of wheeled artillery that we're seeing at the moment. We were also able to see a video today from a Ukrainian fighter pilot flying through the skies of Ukraine, which was incredibly cool and very cinematic even.
Look at that. You know, it's got to be nice.
Man, that looks great, man. I would love to fly that thing. Also, Real News Network, you are largely correct. There is nothing that would be nuked in the southern hemisphere of the globe, and so largely anyone in the southern hemisphere would get through a nuclear conflict unscathed. It's pretty much everyone else, though, in the northern hemisphere that would end up getting nuked. That's kind of the weird thing about nuclear conflict, is that there isn't really a lot of strategic targets on the southern side of the globe, which is just weird. But anyways, we are moving on into the next one, where we also get to see a really cool heli flyover, and check this out. And we're going to be muting that, but here comes the Mi-24. And there it goes.
And there it went.
Yeah.
Hello, Mi-24. Bye-bye, Mi-24.
And we can see it flying over again, this time in the dawn. And that's the end of the clip right there, but still very interesting to see. And moving on from that, we also got to see some pictures from the fall of a Challenger 2, most likely in the Kursk Oblast, which we can see right here. Really cool to see. We love the Challenger 2. It's an amazing main battle tank. Only one of them has been destroyed so far in combat, and that was really from a lucky artillery strike. We also got to see an SPG-9 gunner right here. We also got to see a Ukrainian FPV drone. We also got to see them playing around with them a little bit more. I believe that's a Piorin, if I'm correct. And we can also see the dual Maxim mounted onto the pickup, as well as the AK-74. We can also see this Ukrainian here operating an M2 Heavy. We can also see this guy operating another FPV drone. We can see this guy riding an APC. We can see these fellas riding in 2S3 Akitsia. We can also see these guys riding the back of the 2S3 Akitsia. We can see these fellas riding the front of it. We can see these guys riding near the barrel. We can see it from another angle. We can see it from on high. We can see it from on low. It's like Dr. Seuss up in here. But moving on from that and into the next bit of news that we also have the location unknowns, which were very interesting to see. And holy moly!
Man, we got one Bobcat today. I'm telling you, only one, but it's better than zero, because yesterday I had none, and I was fiending worse than the hot dog man for one Bobcat kill, and we got one today, and thankfully the withdrawals are gone. But Enforcer, tell us more.
And I got to tell you, the withdrawals are gone, and it does appear that the losses today in the infantry category were actually a little low, which is fairly interesting. According to Ms. Disa, 1,050 troops are lost, is the lowest since September 17th of 2024. However, the 7-day average is still over 1,500. And 8 cruise missiles, except for plus 112 on November 18th of 2024, is the highest since September. So it appears that in some loss categories, it was a little bit lower today than normal, but still, it was pretty freaking good. 1,000 troops wounded and killed in a day is pretty high compared to what the rest of the war has been. But 1,050 Russian soldiers and North Koreans were wounded and killed over the past 24 hours, along with 13 APCs, 32 supply trucks, 1 main battle tank, 5 artillery pieces, 1 drone, 1 MLRS, 8 cruise missiles, 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, and 1 Bobcat skid steer. All in all, it was actually a pretty good day for the Ukrainians, and it does appear that the losses are still mounting up against the Russian Federation's armed forces. And we were able to hear, according to the Ukrainians, that apparently some North Koreans have been spotted in the Kharkiv region near Dvovchansk, and it's the first time that these North Korean soldiers have ever been seen outside of Russia's borders. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians were repelling some Russian convoys that were attempting to conduct an assault on the outskirts of Vovchansk today, dropping drone bomblets on top of them and making sure to push them back a little bit more. Quote of the week: some folks are roaches. They think they're nuclear resistant.
That was pretty good. I came up with that literally right now. I was thinking, you know, I saw someone in the live chat say, "I'm not scared of fallout. I'm like, bring it on if it means like taking down Russia." Now, listen, now I'm all for like going up against Russia. Like we've been doing that and helping out Ukraine here from the United States for years now. All for it. But at the same time, though, I'm not an idiot. I don't want to like go down in a nuclear hellfire, and that doesn't mean we're bowing down to Putin or something like that. That simply means to be sensible. So as we move forward, let's not, you know, cause a nuclear exchange to happen. Let's, you know, keep fighting Putin, but keep it a little bit below the point of causing an apocalypse, because nobody wants to die in an apocalypse. So also, I'm not a roach. I'm not nuclear resistant, and you aren't either. So
Man,
we should keep that in mind.
I just gotta say this though. This is something I'm laughing at. Imagine if these people, man, like the people who are saying this, which aren't a lot, honestly, it's just a very vocal minority in the live chat. But imagine if these people were the people around during the Cuban Missile Crisis. They would have been saying, Kennedy's a weak piece of shit. He just gave up. We should have nuked him, man. Like, nuked the hell out of him. And, like, it's like, that wouldn't have ended well. Or, like, for example, during Operation Able Archer in 1985, when the Soviets started freaking out, they would have been on the American side going, dude, they're getting freaked out. Just nuke him, man. Kill him. Like, it's like, these people, this kind of insane mindset. I'm not going to lie. Getting to that point, it is insane, would have led to everyone being killed decades ago. Like, I'm just saying, I'm sorry. Like, maybe that's why that kind of a mindset hasn't been the prevailing one, because that would have led to everyone getting killed. Especially if you think that winning the war, but just giving up a little bit so that way they don't end up, well, not they, but we both don't end up killing everyone in the Northern Hemisphere is appeasement. That's really wonky. I'm not going to lie. That's some Willy Wonka world kind of like goofy logic. I don't even know where that comes from. And so with that, we are now going to be moving on further down the line and into the area of Cremena, where we did get to see some Brazilian volunteers on patrol. Man, but some of these folks who are in the live chat, I want to say this. Some of the folks who are in the live chat who were adamant on that, man, like someone said they would have been wearing out pencils. You know, Kennedy would have been like, "Oh boy, what do we have here? What's this letter?" And he would have opened it up. "Dear President Kennedy, you're a weak bitch because you would not nuke the Russians." Like, signed Benny or something like that. It's something.
I mean, get it straight though. I mean, if the day comes down to it, where Putin is threatening us with the inch of our life, like he's going to kill us tomorrow or something, like believe me, I believe we should yield our nuclear threat as well and tell them we're not backing down. Like when it comes to like our survival. So if it comes down to like us versus you, it's going to be you. Like I am a big believer in that. But at the same time, we shouldn't encourage a nuclear war to start. Like purposely do things to start one. We shouldn't do that either. It's a fine line that you got to walk. And right now, we're still on the line. Putin is starting to get off the line. That's him doing that. Right now, the West is kind of still on it. But, you know, there are things that you can do to, you know, kind of like secondarily encourage one that you really want to avoid.
Also, I got to add that in as well. I feel like I've said that 90 times tonight, but, you know, no matter what, some people just want to insist that if you just say anything, that does not mean total victory, you're Neville Chamberlain. But if the Russians said, we are going to get everything we want or we're going to nuke you, we would have to say at that point, well, bring it on then. But at this point, what I'm saying is to make sure that we don't just jump to that immediately. Let's say, let's get down to talking and let's see what will be acceptable. And we'll listen to them. And if they say, we want to win completely, we're going to go, hell no, and you're stupid, and you're going to die like an idiot. That's what we would say. But if they say something like, we are willing to give up some of the stuff that we have in Ukraine, but we got to keep a little bit of it, then I would go, okay, well, we can kind of go with that because, you know, that will avoid a nuclear conflict and everyone getting killed. We still get a good amount of the stuff that we got back. And at least even beyond that, we have won just because the Russian military has been completely destroyed through and through, and they will not have a military back. Honestly, it's not going to be in the next 15 years. I would assume for the next 30 because it's been that thoroughly destroyed. We have won at this point, and Putin will never be able to rebuild the military quick enough to start another war on any level to be able to say, well, for really to be able to threaten NATO again, because by the time the Russian military is ever built up to any kind of a scale again, he'll be dead. Like, it'll be over. Like, that's what I'm saying here. We won't even be playing on the same chessboard because the guy playing on the other side will be a totally different guy by that point. And so that's what I'm trying to say here. And also, Tom actually said, Putin's going to laugh, Andrew. Maybe he would. Maybe if we said, what do you want? And he says everything. I'd say, you know, you're gonna be burning in hell pretty soon because we're all gonna be down there apparently. But if he says I'm willing to give up some stuff, I would go, oh, all right, well, let's hear him out. What are you willing to give up a little bit of to just keep the peace here? But we see the Brazilians firing their RPGs here.
We'd like to start with the Donbass, and then we'd like to take some other pieces. Maybe a little bit of Kyiv, maybe a little bit of Lviv. That might do it.
And also, like, have you ever said, man, anything like, we do want all of Ukraine, and we also want to get back the Baltics and parts of Poland? I would say, all right, the nuke subs need to start firing now. That's what I would be like.
How do you like your nukes, small or large?
Yeah, it's like, where would you like them best served? Would you like them on Moscow, or would you like them on St. Petersburg? Which one will be first?
Honestly, though, I hope it doesn't come to that. Like, seriously. Like, if it has to go to that, like, it has to. We can't dodge it. Also, like the people are saying, we can't appease someone to that point, a madman, a dictator, to where we're willing to literally bow down to save our own skin. That would not be the right thing to do, but hopefully it doesn't come to that.
And also, another thing I got to say here is that, yes, that's true. I would agree with that, Matthew. But that's also why I keep on yelling down the horn. We got to do something about Iran getting a nuke, because if you don't like how we're having to deal with this situation right now, or at least how I'm saying we will probably have to end up dealing with it, and you think that's appeasement, well, we're going to have to start doing that to the Iranians too, because they're going to have a nuke, and then what can we do? Someone's going to get nuked and millions will die, or we've just got to try and appease them, well, not really appease them, but compromise on things here and there. That's why I'm a big fan of not having nuclear weapons proliferated to everyone on the damn planet, because then it becomes this literally with every single country on Earth. And so, with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are going to be moving on to the next one, where we also got to see in our next clip a Ukrainian soldier shooting a Magnum 12, which is a special kind of a round in a 12-gauge shotgun. Check this out. Dang.
That kick.
Це хороший буде.
Also, buddy, your phone light's on.
Я теж так подумав.
Oh, he liked that one.
Dude, imagine raiding a trench with that thing, man. Jeez, I think Pink Mist will be on the menu that day. But moving on.
I think over penetration might be an issue with that one.
Man, honestly, I ought to use that as an anti-tank gun. It's like, man, they could probably use it like that. And we can also see here the Ukrainians obliterating Russian forces near Chasiv Yar. Also, Nick B said, how about everyone gets rid of nukes? That's what I would want in a perfect world. Then you could actually get a total victory against Russia, but we don't live in that kind of a world anymore, unfortunately. So we have to kind of, like I say, play the cards we're dealt. We can't go and wish that cards were certain ways, and we also can't kid ourselves into thinking something ridiculous, like some people were trying to say in the chat earlier, oh, America could just destroy Russia's nuclear abilities in minutes, and it won't even be a threat. It's like, if that was the case, why does the U.S. government always treat it like such a serious threat? It's because they don't have the ability to do that. Otherwise, we wouldn't be acting like that. We would say, oh, really? And then we just destroy their nuclear abilities, and that would be the end of the story. But moving on from that, and on into our next little clip further down the line and towards Kurakove, we did get to see a thermal power plant being bombed. This one's been out of action for quite some time, but the Russians are trying to destroy a defensive structure before they even make it to it, apparently.
Also, we got Bob Dole in the house, too. What about that?
Hey, welcome back, Bob Dole. We love to see Bob Dole. Oh, and there goes James. Unfortunate. But the smoke is rising now from Kurakove. And it appears that the Russians are already trying to soften up the actual front line before they even make it to it, which is fairly ambitious, considering they're not really making a lot of progress in that area currently. But down towards Velika Novosilka, it also appears that the Russians aren't having a good time down here either, as we got to see more Russian columns being destroyed in this area. Also, Cody said, can hacking or EMP disruptor destroy their nuclear capability? No, nuclear capabilities worldwide are run on analog systems to completely avoid a threat of hacking. And also, there is really no such thing as a large enough or powerful enough EMP to just wipe out their nuclear abilities off the board. We have some fairly significant sized EMP sort of weapons, but they're aircraft mounted on 747s, and I believe all of them were also retired as well at this point, because they weren't really that effective and they didn't really have that big of a range. They would easily be shot down by Russian air defense before they made it far enough to actually start affecting nuke launch sites. And also, most electromagnetic pulses are actually made by nuclear weapons themselves. So to be able to get an effective EMP on them, we would have to have fired a nuke at them, and by that point, they're already firing theirs back. So I hope that addresses that well. Good question, though.
Solid question. Oh, look at that bird. Oh, no, that wasn't a bird. That was somebody going by on a four-wheeler or something.
Man, I'm the biggest bird. I'm the biggest bird. I'm the biggest. But anyways, that's the
Oh
clip.
man, he was scooting by fast. He was trying to be the most alive bird.
I'm a living bird. I'm a living bird. It's like, man, I'm telling you. Well, you can see the column also getting stricken here as well.
And oh boy, it's getting stricken. Man, I'll tell you what, it's getting strucken too.
Man, stricken. I love that word because I believe it is a real word, if I'm correct. A lot of people always like to say it isn't, but let me just go type that in. Let's see here. Stricken. According to the Oxford Dictionary of Languages, or the Oxford Languages Dictionary, stricken. Verb, past participle of strike, since 2 of the verb ends 7 of the verb, or as an adjective, seriously affected by an undesirable condition or unpleasant feeling. And so it appears that the word stricken is real. Interesting.
Use it in a sentence. The Russians were stricken with losses.
Yes. Or the tank was stricken by an FPV drone in the past tense. So there you have it. Stricken is a word. Checkmate. Moving on from that and out of that area, we were able to hear of some North Korean engineers arriving in Mariupol today. The exact cause is unknown, but we are believing that it's most likely measles. But moving on from that and on up into Kyiv, it is now time for us to get to the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on day 1003 of the war. And so without further ado, here is the speech. Speech!
Speech!
Terrible voice crack, by the way, but here's the speech.
Бажаю здоров'я, шановні українці, українки. Сьогодні оприлюднений перший список осіб, які позбавлені державних нагород України та спеціальних звань. Всі вони обрали підтримку злочинної війни проти України та й просто втратили гідність. Навіть прізвища їхні називати не хочеться, і вже ніколи їх не буде тут в Україні, тож і всі зв'язки їх з Україною ми приберемо. Служба безпеки України готує нові пропозиції щодо таких санкцій. Друге. Сьогодні встановлено вже більше деталей щодо нової ракети, якою Росія ударила по Дніпру. Ми дамо всі деталі журналістам і міжнародним медіа. Світ має знати правду та усвідомлювати, що єдиний, хто не хоче миру, це Росія. Саме для того Росії потрібні ескалації. Я вдячний всім партнерам, які вже відреагували на цей черговий приступ російського божевілля, але й окрім слів треба діяти. І, зокрема, за моїм завданням, міністр оборони України вже проводить зустрічі з нашими партнерами щодо нових систем ППО. Саме таких систем, які здатні захистити життя від нових ризиків. Коли хтось починає використовувати інші країни, вже навіть не тільки для терору, але й для випробування своїх нових ракет через терор, то це точно міжнародний злочин. І від Росії це знущання над позицією таких держав, як Китай, держав глобального півдня, деяких лідерів, які щоразу закликають до стриманості, а у відповідь отримують від Москви незмінно якусь нову ескалацію. Тому світ повинен звучати серйозно у відповідь. Так, щоб Путін дійсно боявся розширювати війну та відчував реальні наслідки своїх вчинків. Справжній мир досягається завдяки силі, не інакше. Третє. Що стосується нашого реагування тут в Україні на ці російські удари, на різні інформації про загрози. Сьогодні вже 1003-й день цієї війни. Всі протоколи безпеки зараз такі ж, як і раніше. Якщо лунає сигнал повітряної тривоги, треба реагувати, берегти себе і йти в укриття. Якою б не була російська ракетна загроза, її не можна ігнорувати. Але коли немає повітряної тривоги, держава, виробництва, посольства, всі мають працювати однаково. І сприймати інформацію, зокрема від розвідок, саме як інформацію, а не дозвіл на вихідний. Це стосується всіх, від Верховної Ради України та інших структур та гілок влади до органів управління в областях і громадах. Сирена звучить, йдемо в укриття. Коли немає сирени, працюємо і служимо. У війні інакше не буває. Маємо бути свідомі того, що товариш Путін буде і надалі залякувати нас. Він на цьому всю свою владу побудував. Важливо вміти правильно реагувати та робити все, щоб ця війна поверталась додому в Росію і щоб там відчували, що таке війна. І ще одне, я хочу подякувати нашим бойовим бригадам, які проявили себе ефективно за цей тиждень. 38-ма окрема бригада морської піхоти, 39-й окремий зенітний ракетний полк, 68-ма окрема єгерська бригада, 102-га, 108-ма, 124-та, 126-та окремі бригади ТРО, 128-ма окрема гірсько-штурмова бригада та 425-й окремий штурмовий батальйон. Дякую вам, воїни. І окремо всім підрозділам в районах Курської операції, всім, хто дійсно стійкий. Слава Україні!
And with that, that is the end of the speech from President Volodymyr Zelenskyy here on day 1003 of the war. And that is moving us on into the second segment of this stream where we get to talk to all of y'all. And boy, howdy, is it going to be an interesting segment. We have so much to talk about, a lot to talk about, a real chance to get to talk to all of y'all about what is really going on in the world, or maybe what y'all want to talk about as well. But nevertheless, we have the chance to be able to spend the time talking to all of you. But if you have enjoyed this amazing stream, please make sure to subscribe. We have gotten about 2,000 subscribers today, and I have to thank you all once again for joining this amazing channel, and also making sure to let us know that you greatly enjoy what we do. But still, I hope that the chance. But beyond that, I hope that does address that fairly well. Thank you to the 2,000 people who have joined the LSA today, because it is absolutely incredible to see that so many of y'all have. And so with that, Matthew, take it away.
All right, and it is now officially time for our last question segment and also our live chat segment of the night. And also, real quick, you might notice we have no more polls to address. That's because I think we are polled out for the night, honestly. We've had some very interesting questions being asked in our polls, and I think everybody might need a mental break here from the poll questions because they were pretty heavy tonight, and the discussion was indeed fierce. But anyways, we are jumping into our super chats first off the bat, and this one is going to go to Andrea Fed, who puts in a $33 donation, and thank you very much, Andrea, for that support and, of course, helping to keep us running. And she said, I just have to say that you guys are totally professional and unparalleled, and thank you very much for that, by the way. We appreciate the kind words. And she said that intro is the most incredible addition, Enforcers, and I can't believe how much work you guys put in, and also Reuters, and please take one from the chat.
And thank you so much for the kind words and the support, and thank you for really enjoying our news coverage and our professionalism, which hopefully has shown through a good bit tonight. I will have to say, though, that at some point I actually did start to get a little bit annoyed. Some people may have heard it, because it is, like, not to talk about it too much, but it is annoying when I'm trying to work on practicalities and not, you know, just sensationalism like other people do, and then some people don't get that, and then they want to say that I'm Neville Chamberlain because I'm trying to work in a realistic world, you know, not being, you know, just a pushover, but also not being so doghead we get everyone killed. You know, I was trying to do that. Hopefully that showed through a good bit, or at least how I was trying to explain it. I thank you so much for enjoying the channel and appreciating it, and also thank you for enjoying the intro, especially the news segment that was added with the armed forces in medley. We try our best to convey a strong sense of American patriotism and pride on the channel, because while the channel and the LSA is an international one and has viewers from quite literally every country on Earth, and especially all of the Western ones, this is an American-based channel, and we do like to make sure to make most of the channel's population, which is around 54% American, very proud with what we're doing, or at least the country that they're living in. And I hope that that intro really conveys that sense of pride that we try and have in this republic, as well as the feeling of pride I think everyone should have in this republic, because it is truly an amazing nation to live in, and one worth fighting for sure, and one worth being incredibly proud about as well, and working for every single day. And I got to thank you so much once again for that support. And I also have to say a big thanks to you so much once again for enjoying the channel enough to support it and help it to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, Andrea Fed, we wouldn't have been able to make this thing possible. And yes, Reuters did reach out to us. They have not reached back out to us. I think when Matthew told them that we were like semi-professionals, they were like, oh, noted, and then they just move on. So I don't really know for sure. Still cool that they reached out to us at all. And also was cool to know that there was a specific person that reached out actually was a fan of the channel. So that was pretty neat to know. But I do thank you so much once again for support, and we will make sure to take that live chat in honor of Andrea Fed. And so Matthew, what do we got?
You think they realize I'm not a missile expert after all, and they're like, "Oh, wait a minute, this guy's not a missile expert." Based on the sounds of it, it sounded like he might have been a missile expert, but he's not. Just like, honestly, I had to be honest though. I couldn't go in there BSing my way into that because I'm not a missile expert. That's the honest to God truth. I'm obviously a political science grad, so I know my thing on that, but I don't know everything about the technicalities of specific missiles. So I'm not going to like feign like some intelligence on that because I simply don't have the answers memorized. The enforcer would know more about that than me. So if there's anybody to ask, it would have been the enforcer. But even at that, well, neither one of us are missile experts, but the enforcer probably is more so one than me. But anyways, moving into that live chat question here, sponsored by Andrea Fed. This one goes to Cody Gillian, who said, do you know how well defended Russia's east coast actually is?
Russia's east coast isn't really defended that much. The thing is, though, is that it's not defended because it's practically inhospitable and unpopulated for that reason. So if we're talking about like with a practical ground invasion, it's like that doesn't really pan out because there's not really enough logistics. There's not enough infrastructure out there to support any logistics to have a large armed force invade from eastern Russia. And then on top of that, they got to make the long and arduous march pretty much down the Trans-Siberian Railway all the way to the Ural Mountains and then into western Russia where the real stuff is. So in that note, I would say it's not well defended at all, but it's really poorly defended because there really isn't anything out there to fight over, to be entirely honest, or really to defend. Western Russia is where you'll find most of everything. The people, I believe it's something like 80% of everyone in Russia lives west of the Urals, which is pretty much inside of European Russia. Also, on top of that, most of the defenses are here. Most of the military infrastructure is here. Pretty much anything and everything that really is of any value or worth is in the European part of Russia and not the Asian part of Russia. The Asian part was very recently added to the Russian Empire and the Russian Empire, the Soviet Union, and the Russian Federation, because before that, really this never existed as a part of Russia. This was all a whole bunch of different tribes that lived in this area of Siberian people, and then during the early 1800s, when most of Europe was in the race for Africa, annexing or taking over different parts of Africa to control, Russia really couldn't get into that game because Russia was about as backwards and sucked as badly then as they do now. So what they thought would be cool is if they did the same thing, but they just took over Siberia and pretty much annexed it from the local people. And so what they said, well, actually, Catherine the Great said, oh, Siberia is going to be like the Mexico of Spain. It's going to be like the, let's see, what did she also say? She said, it's going to be like the Brazil to Portugal. It's going to be where the Russian Empire finds unlimited wealth and fortune. And then they didn't really find any of that out there, to be entirely honest. It was like pretty much undeveloped the entire time during the Russian Empire. The only time it really turned into anything developed at all was during the Soviet Union, during World War II, when Stalin moved a lot of Soviet industry into the Urals. That was really the only time it ended up getting developed, and that's why it only stays partially developed even to this day, because there's just not really a lot out there to take advantage of, or at least, like, there is a lot of resources out there, sure, but they're really hard to access for the Russians. It's very expensive, and therefore it doesn't really become economically feasible. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can, at least fairly well. And I hope that does answer that live chat well on top of that as to why Eastern Russia really isn't well defended at all. It's because there really isn't anything out there, and it's pretty much an inhospitable hellscape. But with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to none other than Hokey Redneck once again, who throws in his second super chat of the night. And huge shout to you, Hokey Redneck, for your $50 support, and we appreciate it. And Hokey says, "Who was seeing the movie the day after as a kid, and it scared the crap out of me when I was 12, and it came out in '83." And I would assume that's probably like a nuclear apocalypse style movie or something like that. I would assume.
Yes, it is. It is a nuclear apocalypse movie. It was pretty common here in the United States. And let me go show you all this really quickly. See if I can find it. So here we go. This is at least a Wikipedia page on it. This is the day after. It was a movie talking about a fictional war in between NATO and the Warsaw Pact that turned into a nuclear exchange, and then what kind of life was like after that. The thing is that crazily enough, this movie was actually really tame. There's a more disturbing and morbid movie that is out there about what a nuclear war would look like, and it actually is British, and to be entirely honest with y'all, it's a lot more realistic on what a post-nuclear world would look like in the Northern Hemisphere. And that movie is the movie Threads. Threads is truly nightmare fuel, and let me see if I can find the Threads movie.
Threads Instagram. Oh my god.
Yeah.
That's nightmare fuel too.
Yeah, it's like, oh my god. This movie was actually very realistic on how a nuclear conflict would begin in 1984, and it was also very realistic on what the UK would look like in particular after a nuclear war, which is pretty much where what most places in the world would look like after a nuclear conflict. It didn't really focus on like the fallout, like the Fallout 4 kind of a world or something like that a lot of people would think about. It was incredibly hyper realistic. The entire nuclear war started because the United States invaded and occupied the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Soviet Union then invaded in return because they believed that to be a violation of the Islamic Republic's sovereignty. They started throwing nuclear weapons at each other in a tactical form in Iran, and then they went to a strategic exchange. I've got to tell y'all that the movie, I'm trying to figure out how to describe it because I believe it still is, the copyright still largely enforced by the BBC, which was the ones who made the production, but it was incredibly morbid, very, very morbid and hyper-realistic at that. And I'm trying to think of some of the more brutal things that were seen in the movie. Let's see. Like, people would just die in the saddest ways. Like, an old couple was trying to get into a bomb shelter, and they made it into it, but a piece of debris fell in the doorway that was big enough to pretty much block it, and because they were old and feeble, they couldn't get out, so they just starved to death down there and just died inside of the shelter. That was one of the parts that happened. Another one is that the local town council in Sheffield was under the city hall, but because the nuke went off in an airburst right over the city, well, actually, it was near a RAF airfield right outside of the city, it ended up destroying the city hall, and it ended up burying their bunker. So the entire time that they were alive down there, they were trying to get in contact with the central, well, at least the regional government for the county of Sheffield, but the county of Sheffield said that their resources were spread so thin there was no way anyone could get out there and clear the debris for those guys to get out. So then they all ended up dying in their bunkers as well. A load of people ended up dying after the conflict from injuries and burns. There, of course, the medical industry didn't exist and was completely overwhelmed because they had no resources. And much like all the predictions go, even in the modern day, 2/3 of the British population died in the first year. A third of them died as soon as the bombs went off, and then another third of them died in the subsequent year from the injuries that they had sustained during the conflict, and also due to the complete lack of modern medicines that keep a lot of people alive. And that's something I don't think a lot of people understand. Like, if you're one of those people who thinks you're going to be the ultra survivalist in a nuclear world and you are using blood pressure medicine at the moment, you should expect to die fairly quickly after a nuclear war. There's going to be no more blood pressure medicine being made out there anymore because anyone who was making it is dead. And also all the facilities that made it were destroyed. So all of the blood pressure medicine that's out there in the world right now, it exists until it expires at that point, and then there is none left to have. So that is largely, I would say, this movie is largely more realistic than The Day After. Not to disrespect The Day After. The Day After was scary as it was, but Threads was more terrifying. Also, Deboya J said, look up When the Wind Blows. That was an animated one, and even more so was just like to make you feel sad, which it does, but Threads was like hyper-realistic in its portrayal. And let me see really quickly I wish I could show it to y'all because everything about it was just way too realistic and how it portrayed everything. It was like if I wish I could show it to y'all right now because if y'all saw it, y'all be like, wow, that really does look a lot like what you would believe it to really look like in a realistic world. Like, it doesn't turn into Fallout 4 where there's like mutants and ghouls and everything. It's just hyper realistic. And that's how they meant to portray it, to actually show what it would look like. And this was actually made, I believe, in conjunction with the British government and their estimates of how things would go in a nuclear conflict. So this was supposed to be pretty much a simulation on film of what a post-nuclear world would look like in the Northern Hemisphere. And that's also why, knowing that this is largely what would happen, like mostly I don't say movies are exactly how things go in real life, because most movies are based in fiction, or most movies take creative liberties to really move the plot along. But the movie Threads is quite literally exactly what a nuclear war would look like after the bombs had fallen and the fallout was subsiding. This is what it would look like. And knowing the horror of what that is, and also knowing that most everyone would die and there would never be a good standard of living beyond that for everyone else who was left, which won't be that many people, it's something that lets you know, it's not really worth dying over a concept of total victory in Ukraine when that's not achievable without this happening. Also, that's a bit of a misnomer in itself. If everyone gets nuked, the Russians, us included, no one's won. Everyone lost. I don't know if people are getting that through their head whenever they were saying that kind of stuff earlier, that this is appeasement. This isn't appeasement because we're still going to win and we're still going to get a good amount of what is in Ukraine that the Russians are holding back. But if you're saying we have to win everything, or I want everyone around me to die, including myself, and then the few people who are left alive will have to live with the horror of knowing just about everyone they knew was killed in this nuclear onslaught, is that really a logical way of thinking? Like, no, it's not even a question. That's a rhetorical question. It isn't a logical way of thinking. If the Russians think that stupidly, then we just have to work on that metric. We'll have to end up nuking them. They end up nuking us. But we have to first see, are you willing to compromise a little bit? And if they're not, then we nuke them. If we end up seeing that they are willing to compromise, we still end up winning, and they get a little bit of stuff, so that way they can maybe claim a tiniest sliver of a victory, but they didn't achieve anything that they were wanting to achieve from the outset, and then that's the end, and we win for the large part, and they aren't able to do anything. In 10 to 15 years, Putin's dead, or he's completely thrown out of office, and that's the end. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. I thank you so much once again for support, though, and helping us to keep this thing running, because if it was not for folks like you, we would not be able to make this thing possible. Also, Matthew, I see that you put a hyperlink into the YouTube chat. What is that?
That's a link to my video. You remember that nuclear video I made almost a year and a half ago? It was like that really it's kind of sad and philosophical thing that I made a while back. Do you remember that one?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking when I made that. I watched a clip of it just a minute ago as I was looking at the movie you mentioned, and my video was recommended to myself, which is really weird. And I listened to it, and I was like, I don't know what I was thinking when I made that. I must have been in the fields or something like that when I made that. It's actually quite depressing to watch. But if you want to take a look at that and get depressed, go take a look.
Also, I saw someone say, it seems the Enforcer believes Putin is nuts enough to use nukes. And at this point, instead of people would go, oh, come on, the madman theory, oh, come on. But for the entire war, like anyone who's been watching, y'all know this, we have said, oh, this red line is bogus, this one's bogus, that one's bogus, they're probably going to do nothing. We even said on this one, I said it at least, Matthew said, I don't know, this one seems a little different. I said initially, when the ATACMS were used at the Gral Arsenal outside of Bryansk, I said, that's probably going to end up being nothing. We crossed another red line, and they'll do absolutely nothing in return for that. And then they launched an IRBM, and that completely threw my analysis out the window. I was entirely wrong on that, and now we do know that we are getting very close to a red line. And this is I feel like I'm going to have to conduct a little bit of criticism here of some. It appears most of these people have left at this point, but people have to be reasonable. And I find that a lot of people are dog-headed to the point of stupidity in the modern world, and some of these people that were saying this stuff earlier are these people, because, yes, you don't want to be scared to the point that you conduct appeasement. And also, pretty much all the red lines that the Russians have laid out at this point have been lies. Like, every single one of them. We crossed them and they did nothing. But at some point, though, there has to be an understanding that you couldn't go to the point of nuking the Russians and they do nothing in return. You can't be that stupid and undynamic to think that and actually believe it. Because there is a point where we are going to push the Russians, and we've known this for quite some time. There will be a point where we actually will push them to their red line. We don't know where that is, but it sure as hell wasn't any of the red lines they laid out before. Now we are getting to the point, in my opinion, we are reaching this red line. Whatever that red line was, we're getting really close to it, because firing an IRBM with a MIRV into the Dnipro, that is a very strong escalatory move. Like, that is an incredibly strong one. I don't know if people understand the gravity of that one. That could have easily been armed with nuclear warheads, and that could have easily started a nuclear conflict. There's no question about that. That's why we're treating this seriously, and considering that a lot of people loved our analysis up until we disagree with them, and then they want to cuss us out, that's where we are at right now. We are finally getting to a red line of a sort. And so now we have to understand the way we're dealing with this has to change, because we are actually finally reaching some red lines somewhere. So we have to start saying we need to escalate this a little bit further. We're not going to quit right now. We need to escalate it further. And I think the U.S. possibly moving some more B-61s into Europe is certainly moving in that direction. But once we see it just can't go any further, and we know that the next action will be someone nuking someone, then we need to get to the negotiating table and see what they're willing to do. And that is going to be the ramp off. And this is the one of two things will happen. Either they actually will take that seriously and they will compromise, and they will end up giving some of it, some of Ukraine back, keeping some of it. We still end up winning, and they end up getting enough in their minds that they're happy, at least for now. And then by later we can make sure to work something out where they don't do anything else again without just pretty much being destroyed off the bat, and then a nuclear war beginning, which will ensure that they will not do it. Or we can end up seeing that they are still stupid enough to claim that they want total victory in that alone, and then we'll end up nuking them. Well, we won't end up nuking them. We'll say that that's unacceptable, and then they'll fire nukes at us, we'll fire nukes at them, and it's a lose-lose all around, but that will not be by our doing. That's what's clear. And so that's what we're kind of dealing with right now. And also, Christian Hunter said, you described a game of nuclear chicken. Exactly. That's how nuclear weapons are worked. They are quite literally worked like a game of chicken. And that's how they've always been played. That's how everyone in the world has played this game. It is nuclear chicken. And diplomatically, we've got to move it all the way up to the top. And then we go, are you willing to get off the ramp? And then they can go, yes, which means that this is all completely avoided and there is no nuclear conflict, or they can go no, and then we let them start it and we finish it. And that's how it goes. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and I thank you so much once again for the support. And also, I'm not blaming any presidents, just to make that clear. I haven't seen anyone yet, but there's been loads of people in our comment sections who are going, oh my God, and just to say this very clearly, oh my God, Biden's going to kill us all. No, he's not. Because this is being done by both Biden and Trump, who are agreeing to these things on phone calls. And also, why in the world is it our president that's at fault when the Russians are the ones who keep pushing this war on? None of what we are doing is the president's fault or the incoming president's fault. We are simply reacting to the situation at hand that the Russians have created. It is their fault if this goes any further. We are just reacting. That's like saying, oh my God, why in the hell was that poor man shot? He was just robbing the gas station. It's like, well, maybe he was shot because he's robbing the gas station. Don't you have some deductive reasoning here? The president of the United States is reacting to what's happening. I do not blame the current president of the United States, and I don't blame the president-elect for coming up with this peace through strength policy that we're trying to implement right now. It's not a bad one, actually. If you look at it from a diplomatic level, this is exactly what we should be doing. And so they're both sitting there cooking, and considering that they were elected by majority of the citizens of this republic, I have to trust that they're going to do what's right for the nation. If they don't, well, I'm not going to be alive to really deride that too much. They probably will not be alive either by that point, because chances are they will most likely be dead. They'll be in the 66% along with me. But for now, considering that they are the presidents of the United States, well, one of them is the president and one of them soon to be the president, I'm going to trust both of them, considering that they were elected by the people, and the people have decided that these are the people who are wise enough and smart enough to lead this country, that they're going to do the right thing. And so that's how I work it. That's how I believe that any reasonable-minded American would work this, especially considering that we're in a time where a nuclear conflict's about to happen. I don't really think this is a time for partisan politics, trying to blame someone. It's not exactly like we're about to vote someone out or have another election here. We need to have faith they're going to do the right thing, because if the ship sinks, everyone's sinking with it. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and also, unfortunately, I don't know if you've heard the Hot Dog Man's little latest thing or not, but I just like came across that as well when I just happened to come across my own video.
Oh, no.
And I listened to the first like 10 seconds of it. Oh my God, you gotta listen to that. Like when you get the chance, like I was in disbelief. But don't show it on the air, by the way. Don't give that guy any credit or any airtime.
Let's see. Is it a stream?
No, it's actually a video I've never seen before. It was made apparently 2 weeks ago.
Oh no, I've seen that one. Yeah,
I saw the first 10 seconds though.
Let me see here. Let me try and refresh my memory. I'm not going to play the audio. God. But let's see here.
The audio's where it's at, man.
Oh, dude. Dude, Oh my lord, dude. Oh my goodness. Yeah,
I can't believe that,
dude. That's
I've never seen that one. I don't know how I missed it.
Man, that is absolutely crazy. I forgot about that 2 weeks ago. Oh man. But anyways, I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one. And also, John Underwood, I would agree with that. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
All right. So we're moving on to our next super chat, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Just making sure it wasn't a live chat. But anyways, moving on to our next super chat.
Look at this.
Hey, look. It's drama
Keemstar
alert in the live chat. What do you know? I was just about to mention you, Keemstar, just a minute ago, but I left your name out of it. But it's good to see you once again. And also, moving on to our next super chat here. This one goes to Live Laugh Toaster Bath, who puts in a $31 donation. And thank you very much, Live Laugh Toaster Bath, for that support.
Hey!
And they said, "Good evening, enforcers. And sorry I haven't been AWOL completely. I've been catching the streams after the fact and currently stuck on the night shift, and please take one from the chat in LSA."
Oh man, the night shift. That's kind of the same thing we're on at this point, honestly, because like I've turned into a night owl. I hardly even see daylight, especially since daylight savings time's a thing now, and the sun goes down, I think, at like the beginning of 4:40 right now. At least here, I don't really get to see the sun much because I wake up at like 12. I stay up till about 3 or 4 in the morning, wake up around 11 or 12. And thank God, I got to say this, thank God I'm getting more sleep, because back in the day, I used to go to sleep at like 4 and wake up at like 9, and I would get like 5 hours of sleep a day, which was horrendous. It was like hell. So luckily I'm getting some more sleep, but I'll wake up and then I eat supper as like my first meal of the day at like 4:30, and then I work. Well, actually, I work on a video as soon as I wake up, and then I work on the stream later on in the day. Work on that, and then we're on air from 9 local time till about 12:30, so for about 3.5 hours straight. And then I try and work on some more stuff in the background, like orchestra stuff and other little cool projects and stuff. And then I spend some time playing games. If there's nothing to do, I'll just play games to pass the time, because I got to kind of like get the caffeine out of my system to be able to go to sleep. And then I finally go to sleep around 3 or 4 and then repeat it again. So I personally do not really see a lot of sunlight anymore. And so I kind of feel like I'm working on the night shift these days, kind of like you. But beyond that, it is perfectly fine. We are just happy to have folks here whenever they're here, whenever they decide to show up and listen to the news. We're always happy to have folks, and life does get in the way of a lot of things all the time for folks. I wish it wasn't like that though, but sometimes it is for people. But I'm still happy to have you here, Live Laugh Toaster Bath, and it's wonderful to know that you're still checking in and enjoying this news, because if it wasn't for folks like you who have been around for years at this point and supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running, we wouldn't have been able to do this as a job. We wouldn't be able to pay our bills, and we wouldn't be able to spend about 70 hours a week each running this thing in the background, and then also putting on the streams and the videos. And so a huge thanks once again for the support. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next super chat here goes to, let's see here, goes to Luke Bowers, who puts in a 20, and thank you very much, Luke, as well, for that very generous support, and I don't see a comment attached to it, but nonetheless, we appreciate it, and Enforcer, what say you?
And I gotta thank you so much for the support. You didn't throw in a comment, but the support means a lot, and it's helping this channel to keep on running, and I gotta thank you massively for that. I also gotta thank, massively, all of the folks who have joined the channel today. It's been insane, to be entirely honest. And let me check this to make sure I'm getting this correct, because I want to give a big thanks and a shout out to everyone who has joined the channel today. We have had 2.4 thousand people joined the channel today as subscribers. And I got to thank everyone who has so far because it's crazy to think that so many people continue to join this channel day in and day out, day after day. And I'm supposing that many people are joining this channel because we have fairly good news and analysis on this side of things. And if that is the case, I've got to give a huge thanks. To be perfectly honest with y'all, to anyone who's known me my entire life, this is just me. I've done this literally all the time. So no one's a stranger to this that's personally known me growing up. But I'm always honored to know that so many people find this analysis to be very worthwhile out here on the great wide internet. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one here is going to go to none other than, guess who? It's Jordy Farrell Van Laroven, who puts in a $55 donation. And thank you very much, Mr. Laroven, for that support. And we appreciate it. He said, when can we expect the LSA 2025 calendar?
Oh, that would be cool. I would love to do it. Like, honestly, that's something I wanted to do a while ago. I don't know how many people do paper calendars, though. Usually most people do, like, calendars on their phone and stuff like that. But I really did want to make an LSA calendar at a time. Right now, we're actually eyeballing making a vinyl record, although that's kind of going out the wayside, though. I'm still, like, kind of considering that in the background, but we might not actually do that. But we are wanting to come up with some more cool LSA stuff to do in the future. And a calendar would be incredibly cool because I am wanting to try and move on into making maybe some really cool custom art for the channel, or something along those lines that has to do with the flag of the LSA and really supporting American and Western interests around the globe. And I just think that that would be incredibly cool. And so with that, I thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And thank you for coming up with a really good idea, Jordy Farrell Van Laroven, because I would love to do that. I've personally thought of that myself. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And also, just to let you know, Jordy, I'm going to be looking into that. I've been thinking about it, but unlike the orchestra side of things where we actually just went and did it, I haven't really looked into that enough to say, you know, I could just get that thing kicked off tomorrow and get it on the ball. So I'm going to look into it a little bit more, especially about trying to find some artists that would be able to do something like that, because I think it would be so cool if we did make a calendar and we had custom LSA art, or really, to just be honest, just have some cool LSA art maybe to put up in our intro card for the LSA. That would be really cool. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that addresses that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, in our next super chat here, and also, by the way, let's see, I also want to ask a question. Let's see here. Someone said, are we going to be streaming on Thanksgiving unless something big happens? So, Enforcer, do we have an answer on that one yet?
Yes, we always take a day off for Thanksgiving at a minimum, and we also always take a day off for Christmas on the channel. Depending on the 4th of July, the 4th of July is kind of done as it comes. Usually we try and skip the 4th of July as well as a national holiday, considering that it's a holiday for this amazing republic and for all of the citizens of this republic to enjoy. We try and skip that holiday as well from running a stream. But beyond that, I would have to say we are not going to be running on Thanksgiving. We're probably going to take that day off unless if something big happens. Now, if something major happens somewhere in the world, like in the Middle East or in Ukraine or over in East Asia with Taiwan or Korea, we will definitely be live on air. Because while the turkey may be cooking, I mean, world events are cooking every day at this point, to be entirely honest with y'all, and we want to make sure that y'all don't miss out on anything. So if we have to miss out on Thanksgiving, that's fine, because we are not going to let folks miss out on news. Because I will, I was blown away by this today. Oh my God. Matthew, we were both blown away by this. So as y'all know, like we're covering tonight, there is nearly, the world's nearly coming to blows over Ukraine right now, and it's getting pretty serious. At least on a diplomatic level. And, you know, the diplomatic level can easily move over into the actual armed conflict level quite easily. And so we were watching CNN again. Like, you know, we didn't really flip. I think we flipped over to Fox for a second. But all of them were talking about who was picked for the Attorney General. And I was like, okay, like, I understand that some people may be interested in that. But it's like we have a very major diplomatic incident happening right now in Eastern Europe, and no one's talking about it. I was like, this is just blowing me away how they're not talking about it. And so we know, we know for sure at this point, if y'all are not getting the news from here, y'all aren't getting it from anywhere, because they're not covering it, and if they do, they're like 36 hours behind. So if something does happen on Thanksgiving, we will be covering it live, unless if it's like a nuclear onslaught, which it will not be happening. But I do have to let y'all know, like, if an intercontinental ballistic missile exchange happens, one, we're probably not going to survive it. Matthew and me won't. Two, it also is going to be happening so quickly, there's no way for us to even get live in time because there's only 15 minutes from the point of launch to the point of impact. So if that happens, y'all are going to be getting an Amber Alert on the phone, and there's going to be no enforcer stream because there's no way we can even get live to cover that. And on top of that, if I'm going to die, like, I love doing this, but I wouldn't want to be live on air feeling the thermal fireball consume me in the split second it will. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Kind of a joking in a side note because, you know, that honestly would be the least of the worries at that point. But still, we are on to the next one. And thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running.
All right. And also, if you want to see how that would work with a nuclear explosion and how the stream would work, I do have a video on that, by the way. I linked it in the comments down there. But anyways, moving on here from that joke, we're moving into our next super chat, which goes to Seba, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Seba, for that very generous support. They said, is it true that if the U.S. raises the DEFCON level, that the public will not be told?
The DEFCON is never supposed to be known by the public. That is true. And so DEFCON levels in the background, no one ever knows them. So if you ever hear a channel go, oh my God, it's DEFCON 2 or something like that. No, it's not. And, you know, and I can't say anything about that much more than that, to be entirely honest. But no one, at least in the public, should know. Only folks in the armed forces would know, and only people who have to be told of that knowledge. It is, I believe it's classified on a need-to-know basis at the DEFCON level. So you never are supposed to know what the actual DEFCON level is in the public. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least from what I understand. And thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Crazy Nanners, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Crazy Nanners, for that support. I think that might be their first ever super chat, if I'm not mistaken, but hopefully I'm not wrong on that. But thank you very much for the support. Excuse me. And they said, thoughts on how to stop the escalation. And we all know where this is headed. And I want Ukraine to be triumphant, but also not worth World War III to the USA. And what are your thoughts?
Very good question. And the way to de-escalate is to escalate further, and at least for now. And that sounds really backwards, but allow me to game it out for all of y'all. So right now, we have gotten to the escalatory level. Like, let's say this. So over the entire war, we've crossed every one of Russia's red lines, and it meant nothing. So they weren't actually red lines. They were just statements with a lot of bravado, and they didn't really mean anything in the end. So we have done that, but we've gotten to a point now to where when we approved the deep strike of Western weaponry into Russia, that is actually getting to crossing the red line. We're actually near it at this point. Like, we don't know how close we're getting, but we're near it. And we also know, because the Russians called the United States and informed us about the IRBM launch before it happened, that they are leaving us one more step. Or at least one more step that I can measure, which is where they launched the IRBM at Ukraine with kinetic warheads in the MIRV, but they do not call us, which would be the next escalatory step for them. That would be just the next logical one. And maybe once they do that, we'll see that they did something else that would leave another step even. But for the moment, we do know that we are at least one step away from truly being at the red line. So with that in mind, us moving the tactical nuclear warheads, the B-6113s, the B-61 TAC-13s or the B-61-13s, whichever way you want to say it, into Europe, is going to be giving us that extra, at least one extra escalatory step. It then will be up to the Russians to see if they move up to the next escalatory step, which I just said, which is firing the IRBM into Ukraine with kinetic warheads, and then not calling the United States to make sure that nuclear escalation does not occur. So when they conduct that, we will know that we are pretty much playing on the edge at that point. We are right at the red line. So with that in mind, then we get with Ukraine and we get with the Russians and we say, this is clearly about to move into a nuclear conflict. Let us see if we can avoid this by discussing the terms for a peace settlement in Ukraine. So then we'll go down into Ukraine And by this point, this is when the de-escalations will be occurring, is at the point the actual negotiations begin. So when the negotiations begin, we are going to say, all right, so at this point, we know that we are not going to be able to reclaim all of the territory in Ukraine, but Russia is not going to be getting any extra territory beyond what they have. If anything, they're going to be losing what they have at the moment. Well, some of what they have at the moment. And if the Russians say, as their term, we want all of eastern Ukraine, east of the Dnipro, we tell them to go to hell because that's unacceptable. Or if we say, and I've got to make this very clear, because at this point in peace negotiations, one has to be fair-ish, at least to a sense, because if it's not entirely fair and one side's on the position where they can nuke you, well, both sides are on a position where they can nuke each other, you can't really achieve all of the terms you want, to be entirely honest. So with that in mind, we say we want back some of what we have, and if they go, no, that's unacceptable, we want to keep everything that we have so far, we go, okay, but we're going to create a DMZ and Ukraine's going to be in NATO by next year. And then they can either go, okay, that's unacceptable, but if we do not get at least some form of a compromise where we end up getting more out of it than what we have right now, and they end up getting, at least in their minds, a little bit more out of it than what they have right now, and then they lose some as well, we will see a nuclear conflict happen. So we have to escalate up to the point that there is a peace negotiation because both sides want off of this carousel, and then if one side isn't really adamant enough about that, the nuclear weapons fly, and that's the end of the scenario for the large part. That's a lose-lose. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and I thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. But that's what we're facing right now, and I hope that does answer that somewhat well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, in our next ones here, go to GunFox61, who's a longtime channel legend, and puts in 2 super chats, that is, and they're each $20 donations. And thank you very much, GunFox, as always, for supporting the channel. And he has the days in history for us today. He says, 1963, John F. Kennedy, the 35th U.S. president, killed. And in 1718, Blackbeard killed off of North Carolina. A lot of killing going on that day. But 1988, stealth bomber unveiled. And 1972, the first B-52 shot down over North Vietnam. And in 2004, the Orange Revolution begins in Ukraine. Also, 1966, Stephanie Kowalek receives a patent for Kevlar at DuPont. 1982, President Ronald Reagan calls for Defense Pact deployment of the MX missile. And 1942, Soviet troops complete the encirclement of the German Sixth Army at, and guess where? At Stalingrad. And also, a question from the chat.
Dang, today was actually a pretty freaking eventful
Busy
day. Yeah, at least in history, this is a really big day. But I got to thank you so much for the support, GunFox61, and supporting this channel and helping to keep on running. And that is crazy to think that so many things, honestly, that kind of relate to Ukraine happened on this day, at least in some form or another. And also, it's crazy to think that Kennedy got shot on this day. Man, I remember back when Kennedy was in that limo, Matthew. I was watching him pass by back then.
What?
I'm just kidding. I'm just playing. I'm not like the immortal enforcer or anything like that. But still, with that, I thank you so much once again for the support, GunFox61, and sharing that big day in history right there. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Steve's Gardening Adventures. Also, by the way, we forgot to grab that question from the live chat. We got to grab that one for GunFox61. And this one from the live chat is going to go to Tony G. It's Tony. He said, if Russia used a tactical nuke, what do you think NATO's response would be?
It depends on where. That it's like no question is really a simple one when you get into the semantics of it, but it depends on where. If it's in Kursk, it means nothing. We're not doing anything about that. If it's in Ukraine itself, we might end up doing something about that because that would be crossing a red line that we laid out at the beginning of the war, that if any nuclear, biological, or chemical weapons were used in Ukraine, the United States was going to get directly involved in the conflict on Ukraine's side. So if we're still working off of that red line, if they use a tactical nuke on Ukraine, we end up getting involved directly in the conflict immediately. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And thank you once again for sponsoring that live chat, GunFox61, and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one does go to Steve's Gardening Adventures, who puts in that 20. And thank you very much, Steve, for that support. He said, have some pizza on me. He said, do you actually think that the USA is going to manage to get the rest of the aid to Ukraine before the presidential changeover?
Oh, certainly. Honestly, to be honest with you, if for some reason nuclear escalation isn't occurring as quickly as we're seeing it right now. I believe that all of the aid that's currently allotted to Ukraine will make it, and then the incoming administration will start up its own form of aid to Ukraine and continue it on forever, for however much longer the conflict will endure until the peace negotiations are actually seen. That's what I would believe at the moment, but I do think that we can get the remainder of the aid that was currently allotted into Ukraine before the new administration takes over. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best we can. And we also have another quote of the week. If all else fails, add a train to the equation, LMAO. And that's right.
Yeah.
We're going to be moving on
right.
into the train segment. I'm just kidding. I'm just playing. But still, I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, Gunfox 61, I would take the rabbit hole. I'm so sorry that I wasn't really able to rabbit hole on any of those, because I did a huge rabbit hole on Diocletian last night in the Roman Empire and the Republic. But sadly, I really can't tonight, because Matthew told me a second ago on a text that we have about 40 super chats left, and we always want to make sure to give time to each and every super chat. So I'm having to try and speed it up a little bit to make sure that we call out everyone's name, give them a huge thanks and bravo before we move on into the live chat. So I'm very sorry about that, because those were some really good topics, but then I just had to be like, yeah, that's really cool, and move on. I felt bad about that, but still, thank you for the support though, Gunfox 61, and hopefully we will have more time to talk about days in history tomorrow night, hopefully. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one here goes to Marion Deemert, who puts in a 20, and it's Marion with actually two different super chats here, 220s that is. And a huge shout to Marion Deemert for being a longtime channel legend as well. They said, Slav Ukraine, Herom Slava. And then the next one, they said, sorry.
And thank you so much for the support. And I don't know what you're sorry for. I don't know, Marion Demon. But it's fine. It's fine. Whatever it was, I didn't even see it. But I do thank you so much for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And Slava Ukraini, Herom Slava, and long live the Least Spring Army. And the Least Spring Army will never die. And so with that, a big thanks to you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
And this one's going to go to none other than Bobo Vasquez, who puts in a 20. And thank you very much, Bobo, as well, for being a longtime channel viewer. He says, I hope you're all having a great night.
And honestly, I'm having an absolutely wonderful night. It was a very interesting segment, a very heated segment for a while in the live chat about the whole the nuclear threat thing that's going on right now. But it was still interesting. Long-lasting. Honestly, it was long-lasting. It lasted like an hour or so. It was like, dang, this is like the longest thing we've ever talked about. But I still thank you so much for support. Yeah, I had a pretty good night tonight, to be entirely honest. It was very exhilarating, if you want to call it that. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one is going to go to Jeffrey Osborne, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Jeffrey, as well, for that support. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm taking like stabs at this because I can't see the fan funding tab for some reason. But I think that might have been Jeffrey's first super chat. But if it is, huge shout out to you. And I don't see a comment attached. But Enforcer, what say you?
And it was Jeffrey Osborne's first super chat. Hey,
let's go, Jack.
Let's go, Jack. What happened? We're bombing Russians like Baghdad. Damn, they must be from Iraq the way they Baghdad ass. My name is John. I gotta thank you so much for the first super chat ever, Jeffrey Osborne, and helping this channel to keep on running. You didn't throw in a comment, but the support is absolutely incredible. And if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this channel possible. We wouldn't be able to keep it running, and we wouldn't be able to put out the analysis and news that we've been putting out for 1,003 days at this point. So a big thanks to you so much once again. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to none other than Danny B, who puts in a 20. And thank you very much, Danny, for sending that super chat tonight, because last night YouTube gave you some issues with the super chat, but thankfully I was told that they refunded it to you. So I'm glad that got sorted out. And also thank you very much for sending one tonight. He said, good evening, Enforcers, and Chef Danny here. And do y'all think the U.S. would really get involved in any of the wars going on?
Yes, in some instances, I think we will. If Ukraine got nuked, I think we would get involved. If Iran ended up crippling Israel somehow, probably wouldn't happen, but if they did, we would get involved. If the Chinese started looking like they were invading Taiwan, we would militarily get involved in their defense before that happened, hopefully. If South Korea got invaded by North Korea, we would be there. We're already there, actually, technically, in South Korea, but if it really kicked off, we would be there defending them. So, in my opinion, yes, I think that we would be there in just about every single situation. And so I hope that does address that well. Thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one goes to Live Laugh Toaster Bath, who puts in a 15. And thank you very much for the support, by the way, as well. They said, let's give the LSA some marmot and some pimp marmot, please. LSA.
Hey, and I can just give a little bit of normal marmot. We can't do marmot and pimp marmot because we are running out of time desperately. I mean, my heavens. But we can do just a little bit of marmot. And so let me get it up here. Oh, hello there. Oh!
But him, it's the marmot. Bring him out. He had to come out of retirement for this one and spit the blood. Oh man, he's a vicious marmot. He doesn't play around. He gets those teeth which have been chomped off with a sawzall, and he goes to work every day. He's chomping down. And also, let's see that fat, juicy tail. Can we get a good look at it? Oh,
Damn,
yeah.
son.
Back down, ass up. How about that? And also, let's see that fly down there. Let's see what he's doing. What you doing down there, you little bastard?
Before we do, Matthew, I have to do this, man. It's obligatory, singing all this cake. SpongeBob, me boy. Give him some of that Krabby Patty with a special sauce. That's like,
Oh, my God.
But that's
Oh,
time
my
for the
God.
fly. Aw, man. Aw, man. There was a whole dead silence right there, and I thought he was going to say something. Aw, man. I'm going to sit here, down here on my rock, and I'm going to get some crystal rock. Aw, man. An absolute...
Listen, hot dog man, I think you're just full of crap. How about that? Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Jinx. Dude, I think you're stupid. Yes, sir. Like, I'm going to ban you. You should, sir. Thank you, sir. Like, it's
Please,
like...
I beg for the punishment, please.
Oh, man. And then he got off, and then he made the ultra cool Chat Alpha male edit of himself, and then he got copyright strike for it. And he was using his own stuff. He was using his own stuff. It's like, man, you can't make this up. This is just the funniest thing that ever happened. But anyways, with that, I thank you so much for giving support. I hope you enjoyed the Marmot and the Fly segment. We always love the Marmot. We always love Alan the Marmot. And thank you once again for helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it was not for folks like you, we would not be able to make this thing possible. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And guess what? Our next one goes to LSA Rocks, who puts in a $50 donation. And huge shout to LSA Rocks, and thank you once again for that support. They said, tank Marmot all the way.
And tank marmot all the way. I have never seen a tank marmot, but I would love to see a tank marmot. I would want to put a marmot in a tank. I think it would be well fitting in a tank. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support, LSA Rocks. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and moving on from LSA Rock Super Chat, we're moving on to our next one, which goes to Cliff H, who puts in an 11. And thank you very much, Cliff, as well, for that support.
Hey.
He said, a very important update is that the ruble is collapsing and has sunk to 104 per $1. Damn. And the Russian central bank no longer has the currency reserves to prop it up, and economic collapse soon in LSA. And I tell you what, the inflation is picking up rapidly over there in Russia. Like, it's insane. Like, 104 per $1, that is nuts.
Actually, it looks like this is the lowest it's ever been, actually. It's like this is the lowest the ruble's ever gotten in history. Where did it get right there? Yeah, it has not gotten this low before. So this is a new low. And so with that,
you know, Russia's largest bank is offering a new rate on loans for about $400. You know how much you can get interest rate wise on $400 loan?
What, like 30%?
I think it's like 47% interest.
Ooh. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Dude, that's
Yeah.
crazy.
Yeah, I don't think you're borrowing $400. Although $400, like I think that's 400 USD. In Russian money, that's like you're freaking rich if you got 400 USD in Russian money. I think.
Dude,
so
that's like 40,000 rubles or something like that.
Yeah, you're a rich man. Like you're living high on the hog with 400 USD. So to have the privilege of getting that loan, 47% interest.
And so that is that's pretty wild, I'm not going to lie. Dude, I would hate to be a Russian. It's a bad year for Russians, honestly. But I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the next one.
All right. So our next one here goes to Putin is a crapshoot, who puts in a $10 donation and says, a poofed.
And I thank you for the support. I hope that does address that somewhat well. And with that, we are on to the next one. But thank you so much once again.
And the next one also goes to Putin is a crapshoot, who puts in a $10 donation and says, poofed, gurgle, pert.
And poofed Google pert, I thank you for the support and helping the show to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible and make those noises. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
The next one also goes to Putin is a crapshoot, who puts in a $10
Again?
donation once again and says, this isn't Poofed. War. It's a squeak. It's a special plop military operation. Poofed.
This is new. Like, I've never heard of this one, but still, thank you for the
This
support.
is in the last name Tolls, by the way.
Oh, that makes sense. That makes sense. But I still thank you for the support, Jenna, last name Tolls, and helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Danny B once again, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Danny B. He says, so I was listening to another channel earlier, and I won't mention his name on the live chat, but this guy was pretty begging for super chats. That makes not was donate. I'll tell you, I already know who you're talking about, Danny B. I know who that is already. The person begging for super chats that bashes everybody for accepting super chats as a way to keep their channel running. That was the guy begging, literally begging. We don't ever beg the audience for super chats, by the way. Like, we appreciate the support, but we're not out here begging. And the other guy here, he's out here begging. So, you know, he's a bit of a hypocrite. But Enforcer, what say you?
Man, that whole guy's like shtick. He's like, oh man, the enforcers are grifters because they make a living covering the war. And then like he's like, give me money. It's like, bro, like, you're doing the same thing. It's like, what's different? And then he's like, you see, it's different when I do it because I take a cheap vacation to Ukraine and go bar crawling. That's what makes me different than those wicked enforcers. It's like, it's so stupid. And like, I think it's funny though, because when we get support, folks support our channel. I'm guessing you do as well, Danny B. I'm guessing everyone does, because you'll actually enjoy what we bring forward to the table. We bring forward good news, we bring forward good analysis, and we hopefully bring forward some entertaining light to it. Although it's pretty, it's pretty heavy stuff. Hopefully, we make it a little bit easier to digest. But with that channel, it's like they bring nothing to the table, and then they just beg for money, and it's like you got to bring some kind of worth or something. And also, that looks so sad to pretty much shame your viewers into supporting your channel. It's like if your viewers don't want to support your channel, or you don't have enough viewers to support your channel, then your channel shouldn't exist because it just doesn't have enough momentum. Like, people don't like it enough. And that's the philosophy we've run with on this channel the whole time. It's like, if viewer support dries up, people don't want us to be on air anymore, and that is what it is. It's not like that's like the viewer's fault or anything. That's our fault. We weren't good enough or interesting enough for people to want to support the channel and help it to keep on air. And people don't have to do that anyways. Like, our channel survives on viewer support through super chats, but that isn't something that we're going to beat people over the head with and be like, you must give a minimum amount of money if you watch this channel. That's stupid. Like, we're just happy to have people here. It's a blessing and a miracle that people even watch this channel, to be entirely honest. So that is crazy to me, Danny B, that guy does that with a straight face. What's even better though is that he beats his viewers over the head to make them pay for his vacations. Like, he tried to go to a national convention for a political party and he tried to make his viewers pay. They bucked him on that one though. Remember that, Matthew? They bucked him on it, so he had to pretend like he didn't have. But then he didn't even refund anyone the money that they had already put in. He just kept it. He just pocketed that, which was like $1,000 at that point. It's like that. Honestly, that guy is very sketch. He's incredibly sketch, and that's why he's always on the offensive, trying to call everyone else sketch or a scammer or something like that, because I think that guy is quite literally the biggest scam in this category, and I think a lot of people finally figured that out. But anyways, I hope that does address that fairly well, and thank you for the support, Danny B, and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next ones.
And our next one here is going to go to AMX10 Speedy Bang Bang, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, AMX10, once again for the support. They said, Putin keeps talking about military facilities in Western countries, and I think he will do something that involves them.
He could try. He would fail at that, though. I would have to say that entirely. Of course, I'm trying to take a more realistic approach to what we're looking at right now with nuclear escalation. But as far as Russia trying to do anything conventionally to a Western force, that is going to be a unmitigated failure from the start. There's no way they can really do anything that would be damaging to the West. If they tried to fire a missile, the Aegis Ashore systems are easily going to shoot that down. There's just no way that they can do that, to be entirely honest. Maybe he'll try, but it would be a pretty abysmal failure from the start, and it would not be a good way to kick things off for the Russians. But maybe so. It's just that I don't think they would do well at it at all. But still, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that the best I can. And we are on to the next one.
And the next one here goes to Scott, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Scott, for the support. He said, in Hunt for Red October, Scott Glenn's character said, the hard part about playing chicken is knowing when to flinch. Who flinches first, Putin or the U.S. president?
That's a good question. Usually you want them to flinch simultaneously, really, so that way no face is lost. So mostly how it was done in the past at least, is that I believe Kennedy called up Khrushchev in the Cuban Missile Crisis and kind of got the negotiations started there, I believe. I'm not actually sure who contacted who, now that I'm thinking about it. I think it was Kennedy contacted Khrushchev, but that could be how it goes. But there isn't really any face that is lost, per se, in flinching in this kind of a situation, because the other side is praying to God that you flinch because they're about to flinch themselves. So, and and also this isn't anything like, I got you, see, because it's like, if you don't get them, you die, like you're going to die along with them. So it's kind of a game where everyone wants to flinch. Like, I can promise you all this: Putin will not live through a nuclear conflict. He's not sitting there in Moscow going, if I escalate this to nuclear warfare, I'm going to be fine. No, he knows that it's shooting against the odds. He would die in a nuclear conflict. 66% of everyone's going to be dead in a year after a nuclear conflict, at least in the current wargaming that's going on. So with that in mind, there's a high chance that the President of the United States would be dead, the President-elect of the United States would be dead, most of the Congress would be dead, most of the Supreme Court would be dead, pretty much most of the federal bureaucracy would be dead in America, and the same thing would apply to the Russians. The President of Russia would most likely be dead, Medvedev would most likely be dead, most of the Russian government, the Duma, would be dead. Most of their bureaucracy and the officials who run it would be dead as well. There would be no winning. Like in a nuclear conflict, there is no such thing as a victory. It is a total defeat on all levels for everyone involved. And so the Russians also understand that as well. It's just that everyone has to play it out until its completion, until we finally flinch simultaneously, and then we get to the negotiating table. But to be entirely honest with you, knowing the disposition, at least the publicly stated disposition of the incoming president-elect, I would be entirely honest, I think the Russians... You know what? Actually, no. I'm trying to think about that. I think the president-elect would actually flinch first, but it wouldn't be flinching from cowardice. It would more so just to be to get the diplomatic negotiations started, because no president of the United States is going to be flinching from cowardice. We have the largest and most powerful armed forces on the face of the planet in human history. So we would not be flinching from cowardice at any step of the way.
Do you want to get an idea here of what the incoming guy might actually think? Because everyone's worried, like, oh, is he going to like force Ukraine to go up this land, that land? And honestly, we don't know what he's going to do yet, so I'm not going to pretend like we know for certain. But apparently, one of his close allies just rejected the idea of negotiating with Putin. This fellow is a senator, by the way. I'm not going to say his name, because we're not getting political here. But he said, quote unquote, as much as I would like to believe that we can negotiate with a tyrant, I suspect that we're deceiving ourselves. And that senator said that, and he's very close with the incoming president. So I think now that Putin is really going overboard, that might change the equation just a little bit when it comes to negotiations in the future.
Maybe so. We'll have to wait and see. But I'm hoping, though, that someone would flinch, because if they do not flinch, both of them do not flinch, most of everyone will die. Some people like to go, oh, you idiot, not everyone's going to die, you liar. It's like, well, if it's 66% of everyone's dead, most everyone's dead. It's like, that's just how statistics work. But anyways, I hope that does address that well. Thank you once again for support, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one here goes to Uncle Sam's misguided child once again, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Uncle Sam, once more. He says, "Hoorah, LSA." And I think we should all be grateful that we still had today and every day we get to gather and discuss these interesting times in Slava Ukraine.
And it certainly is interesting times. And you know what's crazy? A lot of people don't think about this, but me being a history major, I always think about this just about every day we cover this news. We are covering history in the making. A lot like people talk about Napoleon at Waterloo, and a lot of people talk about George Washington crossing the Delaware River here in the United States. People are going to be talking about what we're living through right now for hundreds of years. No matter how this goes, we will see that people will be talking about this probably for centuries. It will be on someone's mind, and the folks who lived during this time, which was all of us, will be remembered in some way, shape, or form, either as people who did the right thing or people who did the wrong thing. The eyes of history are a very unforgiving sort of a thing, really. It's very arbitrary, but nevertheless, It is really crazy to think of that on that kind of a level, is that we are sitting here every single day, and here on this channel, Matthew and me tell all of y'all what's going on in the world every single day. And what's going on out there right now is truly something akin to the Cuban Missile Crisis of a sort. And people have never stopped talking about the Cuban Missile Crisis, and people will never stop talking about these challenging times that we were living through in these days. And of course, one thing I like to think, I came up with this one in the shower today, is that if this was to be America's final hour, then I hope that it is also our finest hour as well. And so I hope that does address that fairly well, and I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here is going to go to none other than Bob Dole. He makes a visit to the live chat and puts in a $10 donation. And also, I realize I missed two $20 donations. I'll come back to those in just a moment. But getting Bob Dole's super chat, he said, "I'm not afraid of no nuke. I used to play Little League Baseball, so I can stop them easily so nobody has to worry. And will it end in a ceasefire treaty like North Korea and South Korea have, and stop but not technically end?"
That's a decent possibility, actually. That's something that's been suggested in the background, is that there will be a DMZ that is created, and that may be the case. But we don't really know for sure. I do believe, though, that this will end in some sort of a negotiated ceasefire. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support, and I hope that does address that well. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Pete Watson, who puts in a $20 donation. And thank you very much, Pete, for the support as well. He said, "Stay safe, Slava Ukraine, and Courage Bridge is falling down, and Hill 60 will rain upon Russia. Peace in Ukraine. And happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas, and Happy New Year 2025, LSA."
Hey, and thank you so much for support, Pete Watson, and supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't have been able to make it possible all the way from the land down under. And so, thank you so much once again. I hope that does address that incredibly well, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't have been able to make this thing possible. And so with that, thank you so much once again. I hope that addressed that the best we can, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here is going to go to Pete Watson. Actually, not Pete Watson. I already got that one, so I will be moving on from that one, actually. This one goes to Putin is a crapshoot, once again, who puts in 20. It says, "I just realized that Pimp Marmot may be pimping the hot dog fly."
Oh yeah, it is. Like you finally caught on. I'm just kidding. It should be though, because the hot dog fly is a very pesky fly, and it should be put in that kind of a position. But nevertheless, I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And I hope I addressed that incredibly well. And with that, we are on to the next one. But before we're on to the next one, Matthew, how many super chats do we have left before we get to the live chats?
So let's see here. Doing a rough count, it looks like we have 50s, 60s. We have about 22 left.
All right. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here is going to go to David Castillo, and David puts in a $10 donation. And thank you very much, David, for the support. He said, "Do you think if Putin kept insisting about a total victory in Ukraine, that China would get involved to try and convince them?"
Yes, I do think that the Chinese would not want to see a nuclear exchange, because China's economy relies on trading with the United States and Europe. That's really some of their largest trading partners, and those largest trading partners, and also their raw resource bulk, which is the Russians, would all be wiped out in that exchange. And so for that reason, the Chinese would probably step in and try and get the Russians to the negotiating table, and pretty much twist their arm behind them to get them to the negotiating table as well. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. At least I'm hoping the Chinese would do something like that. But still, thank you so much once again for support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Adam McLean, longtime channel legend, who puts in a $10 donation. And thank you very much, Adam, for that support. He said that these are very special times. A return of a nuclear threat from the other side of the world, and the enforcers were on the money tonight. And thank you.
And I thank you so much for the kind words, Adam McLean. I hope that we were on the money tonight, because otherwise we would be wrong. And we always don't like being wrong, but when we're wrong, we're just wrong. But I do thank you so much for the kind words and the support, Adam McLean, and helping this channel to keep on running, because you've been around for an incredibly long time, and if it wasn't for folks like you, we would have never been able to make this thing possible. And so with that, thank you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Uncovered Cube, who puts in a 5. And thank you very much, Uncovered Cube, as always. And they said, thanks for the up-to-date and accurate news, and always, LSA.
And thank you so much for enjoying the up-to-date and accurate news. And of course, long live the Lee Spring Army, and the Lee Spring Army will never die. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Gator Nor, who puts in a 5 and says, glory to the like button.
And glory to the like button. 3,313 people have hit the like button tonight. And also, I'm interested in this, Matthew. What is that like ratio like? That's not that low, actually. It's 93.2%. Usually we strike somewhere in the 97 to 96 percentile. But considering that we had so many people who were going literally crazy in the live chat earlier, that's actually not that bad. And in my opinion. So I thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running. And thank you for enjoying the news and coverage and also hitting that like button. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Famaz, who puts in a 5 and says, I just got an Amber Alert while listening to this, and I had a panic attack, and I thought we were cooked because there were nukes.
Chat, are we cooked?
Yo, are we cooked?
Well, I thank you for the support. Luckily, there is no nukes flying at the moment. If there are, though, you will get a federal alert over the phone, and you will know that the nukes are coming. Not really a lot to do in that kind of a scenario, unfortunately, for most people. Most people don't have fallout shelters. We're included in that. So we just kind of have to shelter and wait, or, just get obliterated, one or the other. But with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least the best I can. And I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel keep it running. And hey, luckily nothing bad came out of that alert. But with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Can't Get Right, who puts in a 5 and says, can you talk about our ability to stop an ICBM attack on the U.S. by Russia, and what are our chances if it happens?
Chances are slim. And a lot of people... Oh, man, a lot of people just don't get it. And we try and explain it, and we try and explain it, and then there's just people who don't get it. It's a small group of people, but it always becomes aggravating and infuriating. And to be entirely honest, I get why a lot of people on the internet are just really rude and mean to people, because, the people who don't get it just never get it, and you're just running into a brick wall telling them this stuff. But as far as answering your question on this, the chances of intercepting a large amount of the ICBMs fired is slim. We can intercept some of them, but we can't intercept all of them. Generally, from what we understand, the interception rates would be somewhat low. It would be somewhere around 30% to 35%, but generally, most of them would make it through. That's at least what we know based off of what the United States publicly says. That number could be higher. Usually, we underestimate our abilities. It could be somewhere up closer to 45 or 55%, but still, 45% of those nuclear weapons are going to be making their way to landfall inside the United States. And even if 40% of them made it in, even if just 20% of them made it in, they are going to be causing untold damage to this republic. And that's why when we talk about this, we know it's a serious ordeal. There are a lot of people out there whose brains just don't exist, and they'll say something like, oh, we could just destroy Russia's nuclear abilities in minutes. It's not even a real threat. And you can just defeat that by saying, well, if it's that easy to defeat the nuclear threat, why haven't we done it? Because we would have, for example, if Russia said, we're going to invade Ukraine, yet why in the world would for 3 years we have gone, we don't want a direct war with the nuclear-armed Russia? It's we would have gone, bring it on, and then we would have just wiped out their nuclear abilities and then curb stomped them conventionally and had a total victory, and Putin would be gone, and the world would be a merry, happy place. That's how it would have gone. And it's that's not how it works, because we don't have that kind of an ability. It's yes, U.S. military abilities, as far as they're shown to the public, are not as good as they really are. Our military abilities are better than what the U.S. military even publicly claims. But the thing about that, though, is that doesn't mean that we have space lasers and UFOs that are going to go over to Russia and rain hell on them. Our abilities are better, but that doesn't mean that they're godlike. That's one thing that a lot of people don't understand about that. And so as far as intercepting ICBMs from Russia, maybe 30 to 35% of them on a really high-end estimate, but it's not going to be many of them. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least from what I know. And thank you once again for supporting this channel and helping it to keep on running, because if it wasn't for folks like you, we would not be able to make this thing possible. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one is going to go to Chase Maddie, who puts in a 10. And thank you very much, Chase Maddie, for the support. He said, hey, LSA, and have a good weekend.
And hello, LSA, and have a great weekend. Is today Friday? Today's Saturday? Dude,
Yeah,
I've
no,
lost track
no,
of...
it was Friday. It was Friday. It just turned Saturday.
Okay. Yeah, because I was wondering, I was like, our map is still olive colored. I was like, that's got to be like a Friday or something. But still, thank you for the support and thank you for wishing us a happy Friday and everyone else in the LSA too. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And also, someone said, in the chat, I agree with the enforcer. IQ runs very low here. No, people in the LSA are very like discerning and actually smart folks. But there were a lot of, because tonight we brought in a load of people. We brought in like 13,000 live viewers at the peak. So a lot of those people aren't on the channel, and I guess there's kind of like some of them are nomads. Like not all of them are like stupid. Like I want to make it very clear, there's a very small amount of people who come in this channel or talk in the chat that are stupid, but those people truly do talk the loudest. You find that out on the internet. The stupid people are the loudest, and it's always true. And there's very few of them, but they run their mouths so much you would think that most of the internet's made up of them. And they'll come in here and they'll say stupid stuff like, "Oh, you're appeasing," because I'm like trying to like take a realistic approach to this, where their dumbass doesn't get blown up in a nuclear bombing. It's like, and they don't get it. Like, like these are the kind of people who are so stupid, they get like a pet pit bull and it goes like crazy and it starts mauling people in the street, and they're so dumb they blame the cops for like, not being able to train their dog or take care of it properly. That story is literally based off of me watching like a police body cam today, and it was like the stupidest person ever. But some of those people are like that. Well, most of the small group of people I'm talking about are like that and don't have any sense in them. And that's generally why they aren't in positions where they work on the diplomatic level. Because obviously, someone who goes, "Screw it, nuke them," it's like, well, they don't have a lot of common sense if that's like their rational approach to it. They may as well be as stupid as the Russians. So with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one here goes to Nightmare Before the Christmas, who puts in a 5. It says Putin lost his mind during the Whirlybird and hires yes men, and only he won't launch nuclear. He sees himself as the next Peter the Great, and legacy is all he cares about. LSA.
Exactly. Like, well, as far as the nukes thing, I think he would fire him, but he really does view himself as Peter the Great. Like the Russian Federation's coat of arms is literally that of the Russian Empire, of the Romanov dynasty that Peter the Great founded. He wants to take back the lands that used to be the Russian empires. This guy is literally trying to be Peter the Great. Peter the Great. He's like, people trying to equate him to Stalin or Hitler. And like, to be entirely honest, I think he really is trying to be Peter the Great and Ivan the Terrible combined. Like, that would be my assessment of him. Peter the Great wasn't really that bad of a guy, but Ivan the Terrible was horrendous. And so I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and the next one goes to ICO Rich, who puts in a 5. It says ending the fighting is not enough, and what he wants is to unwind the sanctions, and if they can keep territories and the sanctions end, that is appeasement.
Yeah, maybe so, possibly, but I don't really know, because if he keeps the territories and we get rid of sanctions, it's not really like the Russian military is just ready to fight tomorrow. It's going to maybe take 20 years to rebuild it. So I don't know. Like, I would personally say I still think that would be a loss. And on top of that, I mean, it's not like the Russian economy will recover overnight. It's on the verge of collapsing. And even if you try to reconnect it to the global economy, that thing's still going to implode. I mean, there's no way for it to really recover at this point. It's going to cave in probably in about a year or two, I would assume. So maybe some people will want to call that appeasement, but if the Ukrainian government still survives and most of Ukraine is in the Ukrainian government's hands and they get in NATO, for us, in our purposes, that's largely a victory on Ukraine's end. And on the Russians' end, they still don't have a military to fight with at all at this point, and their economy is about to implode regardless. So we still largely have won on every metric. It's just that we didn't get back all of Ukraine's land at that point. But maybe, I mean, like, I'm not going to say that you're entirely wrong with that. Maybe it would be. I wouldn't lift the sanctions personally. I would keep them on, at least for another 2 years. But I hope that does address that well, and I thank you once again for the support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one here goes to Astesian, who puts in a 5 and says, "Gelijk Valekman in a Deutschen Welt." And oh dear, that is dastardly. But thank you very much for that support once again, and we appreciate it. And we also have a 5 from Michael McNutt Gaming, who does not leave a comment. Excuse me, goodness gracious. And thank you, Michael McNutt, for that support and indeed supporting the channel. And Enforcer, what say you?
And I thank you for supporting the channel and helping this thing to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Chuckster's Adventures, who puts in a 5 and says someone needs to take out Putin, and that might solve the whole problem.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it kind of would, but it's really hard to do that because it's really hard to get near him to get him like that. So, with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And also, Melanie16040 said, suddenly being able to sell billions of dollars a day of oil products will really help their economy. The problem is no one's buying it anymore because the Europeans understand the strategic risk that poses, and they're now buying American oil. And American oil companies are going to make sure to stay competitive with the Russians because the Russian companies are pretty much fixed at whatever price they're going to be selling at. American companies can end up taking a hit to crush the Russian oil industry right now, so they can sell oil a little bit cheaper than the Russians would. So on that note, the Russian oil industry will not be recovering from this. And anyways, on top of that, if anyone's buying the oil currently, they're going to pretty much be the only remaining customers after the war is over, even if the sanctions are lifted, because the Chinese are buying their oil now and they'll keep buying it in the future. But that still isn't even enough to boost their economy because everyone who will be buying it from this point forward buys it at much cheaper prices than Europe used to because they don't have the kind of expendable income that the European Union had when they were buying Russian oil and Russian natural gas. And so for this reason, Russia is cooked. Chat is cooked, like as far as Russia is concerned. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. Big thanks once again for bringing that up, though. Good point. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Active, who puts in a 5 and says Putin will demand to have all the regions that the Ukrainian people illegally, in air quotes, voted to be a part of, Russia at the negotiating table.
If they tried to get them all back, I'm just going to be honest, that's not going to work. Like the Russians, that's once again total victory because the Ukrainians want all of their land back and the Russians completely kicked out. That's total victory on their end as far as their war goals are concerned. And the Russians want to pretty much turn Ukraine into a puppet state and control about half of it, which is total victory on their terms. So neither side can go into the negotiations dog-headed enough to only take total victory, and that is it, because there will be no middle ground found. Those peace talks will fall apart. Nuclear conflict at that point will most likely become an inevitable certainty. So we, at this point, knowing that we're getting really close to nuclear conflict, both sides have to be willing to make some compromise. And also on top of that, Zelenskyy, like I don't know if people are just, ignoring this, but Zelenskyy said it himself just a few days ago. Ukraine will not be able to militarily retake Crimea, maybe diplomatically, but even then that might be a bit of a stretch. So with that, I hope that does address that well, and I think you want to give us support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, so our next one here is going to go to Neil Visinot, who puts in a 5. And huge shout to you, Neil, for the support. He said, de-escalate a little bit and keep the war going status quo and give the CIA time to start a revolution in Russia. And we're working on that. We're a little behind schedule.
Yeah, we're trying. It's just that it's actually harder than one would think to do that in Russia. They have a really good grip on things. But
why did Prigozhin have to die? Why?
Man, he was the guy. Like, he was the golden guy, and he just wasted it. Yeah, he just wasted it all. Like, all that potential. He just threw it away. But beyond that, I do thank you for the support, and hopefully that would be the way it would go. That would be another good way for it to turn out. But still, thank you once again for the support, and we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Resonance, who puts in a 5 and says, do you think China would involve itself diplomatically or side with Russia if we approach the nuclear red line?
China would tell the Russians to get the hell out of this situation and just get to the negotiating table. China is not really that concerned in the Russians making any territorial gains, because as far as China is concerned, there's really nothing that they would win out of this at all if the Russians even got the land. It doesn't mean anything to them. So with the Chinese concerns, they'd be like, look, man, you're about to destroy our major trading partners, and you're also about to kill yourself in the process, and we're not going to be able to get cheap timbers and oil products out of your country anymore. This has got to stop. Like, that's what the Chinese would most likely say. I don't know. Maybe the Russians wouldn't listen to them. I have a feeling that the Chinese probably hold a lot of weight over the Russian government at this point, though, without a doubt. So the Chinese would most likely be twisting their arm and trying to force them into the negotiating table and be like, look, just compromise and take some, but not all, and just end it, and just get this thing over with, because it's going to screw us all over inside of China. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, but I have a feeling the Chinese are not adamant to watch a nuclear exchange happen in the Northern Hemisphere. And so with that, we are on to the next one.
And the next one goes to Iverson Tucker, who puts in a 5. And thank you very much, Iverson. I think that was one of your first ever supports of the channel, and we appreciate it very much. Iverson says, I found y'all back in August, and I just want to say thank you for the most unbiased and insightful war news around the globe.
Hey, and thank you so much for the kind words, and thank you for being a new channel viewer supporting the channel and helping it to keep on running. We try and be as unbiased and as analytical as we can. Of course, we are pro-Western and pro-American. We always make that very clear because I think that's the mark of a good citizen of the Republic. But nevertheless, I do thank you so much once again for the support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it was not for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to be here right now, months later from August, still running this stream for folks like you. And so thank you so much once again, and we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to LSA Sergeant Figment, who puts in a 2 and says, LSA hit the like button. That's an order.
And LSA hit the like button. That is an order. And a massive shout out to you, LSA Sergeant Figment, for helping this channel to keep on running. Because if it wasn't for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to make this thing possible. Also, Matthew, I just saw Beeps and Eats finding food and treasure in the live chat. And it made me think of that time, man, when we were at the counter earlier today. Because we actually brought up your name, Beeps and Eats. We were eating something. What was it, Matthew? And you sat there and said, man, I'm trying to get some Beeps and Eats. And then I said, find a food and treasure. And then we went, ah. And then we were like,
I was eating that hot wing. That's what I was eating that spicy wing.
Yeah, you were like, man, I'm trying to get some Beeps and Eats, and I was like, find a food and treasure. And so we actually brought you up today, Beeps and Eats, off air, because your name is a pretty cool one. But still, with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, and we are on to the next one.
And our next one goes to Emilio Flores, who puts in a 2 and says, back to the Flintstones we go, yabba dabba doo.
and I bid you abadoo. But beyond that,
abadoo.
Man, abadoo, if I was green, I would die. But beyond that, I thank you so much once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running, because if it was not for folks like you, we wouldn't be able to kind of joke around about possible nuclear conflict. By the way, y'all, I just got to let y'all know, I still think it's not happening until the bombs fly. Like, that's what I would think. So with that, I hope that does address that well. Thank you once again for support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
Do you want me to tell you about my gut feeling again, or are we gonna pass on that one?
We'll pass on that one for now. We're trying to keep it positive right now. So with that, we're on to the next one.
Let's pass on that one. But anyways, moving on to our next super chat here. This one goes to Resonance, who puts in a 2 and says, have you guys thought about starting a Discord?
We actually had one way back in the day when the channel started. Discords are just too much drama, to be entirely honest. Crazy things happen in Discords, and also, I don't know what it is, but there's always like I've been saying, there's always this small, very vocal group of people. And I remember one time they were like, hey man, like, why the hell can we not show NSFW shit on your server, man? Bro, it's like a war. So then we finally allowed it, and then people started posting corn in that thing, and then I had to go down and like school the mods. This was before the second grade schism, and I had to go down and school the mods, and I'd be like, guys, like, this is a war Discord. We don't have corn on the server. Get rid of it and ban the people who are doing that. Okay? Bye-bye. And then I had to leave because we don't have enough time to moderate it ourselves. And considering that our Discords were getting to insane sizes back then, I mean, like, quite literally, there was like 9,000 people on one of them. It was huge. And considering that they're all active, well, at least like 600 of them were active all day, saying stuff all over the server in different channels, it was completely impossible to moderate. So we would love to do it. Problem is that we wouldn't be able to moderate it, and also every time we handed it off to moderators, like chosen moderators, like 20% of them would do their job to the letter, and I was proud of them. 80% of them were garbage. Some of those mods are still here, actually, like some of the great mods that we had during both schisms, like Mace. He's still here. He was one of the incredible mods, but the ones who were not great are not here anymore, and there is no Discord server really for those reasons. But still, I hope that does address that well, and thank you once again for support, and we are on to the next one.
And up next, we have a $5 support from Marty K. And he said it's a 5 GBP, a Great Britain pound. Thank you very much, good sir, for the very heavy support. And he says that's got to be 50. And I don't think so. I don't think so, Jack. He says,
like
long live the
$7.
LSA. He said, long live the LSA and give us the flags.
And I wish we're trying to get him out here soon. We're trying to figure out how to work that logistically in Enforcer Studio 2.0. But we are going to be trying to get out more LSA flags here in the future. And so with that, thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that incredibly well. And also, thank you for your first super chat ever, Marty K, because that means a lot and helps us to keep this thing running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And up next, I want to give a big shout out to Sean Altman, who put in a $4 donation. And he said, what does a win and loss look like on both sides?
A win and a loss. Well, I'll try and knock it down really quickly. A win on the American side. Yeah, well, not to the American side. We'll just say the Western side to include everyone because American side sounds really like just for America. But a win on the Western side would be that Ukraine gets back parts of its territory, joins NATO, and that's really it. A loss on our side would be that Ukraine turns into a Russian puppet state and ends up either becoming a neutral country or a Russian aligned country. A Russian victory would look like turning Ukraine into a puppet country, and a defeat would be that they lose all of the territories inside of Ukraine, including Crimea, and they're pretty much completely crippled from that point on. So I hope that does address that well, and I thank you once again for sponsoring our live chat and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
All right, and our next one here goes to Midnight Breeze, who puts in a 5 and says, in your opinion, how would you think a NATO response would play out over a Russian attack against Britain?
Article 5 would probably be invoked immediately, and defensive actions would probably already be taking place over Eastern Europe as the UK was attacked, and then the United States would start rolling in conventional forces to begin an offensive attack, but probably immediately we would see that peace negotiations would be beginning in the background and probably happening during the entire time of the conflict to see if they can tone this thing down from turning into a nuclear exchange. So with that, I hope that does address that fairly well, at least the best I can in my opinion. And thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Yagi Unhinged, who puts in a 2 and says, we can't win if we all die. Hypothetical.
Yes, that is true. We can't win if everyone's dead. I could go on about that for hours because it was crazy how I was like, look, y'all, we can still win. We just can't win a total victory. And then people were like, Neville Chamberlain, appeaser, and I'm like, what is wrong with these people? Like, I'm not saying we lose. I'm not saying we give them everything they want, but I'm still saying don't be dog-headed to the point you get everyone killed. You know, it's like, that's all I'm saying here. I'm trying to work from a position of reason and sense, you know, instead of the goofy kind of stuff people work off of in the modern day where no one has any sense, you know, like. But beyond that, yes, there is no winning if everyone's dead. Like in a nuclear war, we don't win and the Russians don't win. I guess some people can't get their minds around that. Everyone is dead, pretty much. Like, there's hardly anyone left. And so who in the world is there even in Ukraine at that point that is alive to say, well, at least we got Crimea? I mean, it's like no one. Like, no one's alive. Like, most of the government's dead. Most everyone in America's dead. Most everyone in Europe is dead. Pretty much everyone in Russia's dead. It's like no one won anything. Everyone just got killed over, honestly, nothing in the end because you didn't even get to claim it. Like, you didn't even win. So that's exactly my point. I thank you for the support and throwing that in because that's what I've been trying to get across tonight. If we're this close to the nuclear red line and we're still not willing to maybe see if the Russians would be willing to come to some compromise, we're going to win nothing and they're going to win nothing. And so with that, I hope that does address that fairly well. And thank you once again for support. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And we've got another super chat from Marion Demert, who puts in a 2 and says, for the pizza fund, and you brothers rock. And thank you, Marion.
Hey, and thank you so much for the support, Marion. And we will make sure to get a pizza, hopefully soon. We had wings today, though, and Matthew's really getting into wings because he likes spices now.
Yes, I like the hot wings. I like that that Buffalo Wild Wings. That's some good stuff. I like that mango habanero, that hot, and that buffalo is really bussin'.
Man, it was actually really good. And we still got wings in the fridge that we got to reheat and eat after the stream. But with that, thank you once again for the support. And we are on to the next one.
And the next one here goes to ICO Rich, who puts in a 2 and says, a deal will mean sanctions get lifted. Is that acceptable?
Really, it wouldn't matter that much, in my opinion. When the Russian economy is this bad off at this point, there's really no way to stop it from completely imploding, even if the sanctions were lifted at this point. So, to be entirely honest, I think that they would probably just end up imploding, even if the sanctions were lifted, in my opinion. But I'm not exactly an economics expert. And so with that, I hope that does address that well. And I thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Bruce Lee, who puts in a 2 and says, empty cans rattled the most. Metallica to crazies.
Man, that's actually deep. That's actually true, too. And I got to thank you for the support and throwing that in because I never thought of it that way, but that's a really good way of thinking about it. And so with that, thank you so much once again. And we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Iverson Tucker, once again, who puts in a 2 and says, I'd buy an LSA patch and LSA vinyl.
And you know, we actually did have some LSA patches. They were like a little extra goodie that went out with all the LSA flags. So they are out there. But we
We
will
still
be.
have quite a good stock as well. We have a surplus.
Yeah, we could actually probably just do a run of those to get them out there to y'all if y'all wanted LSA flag patches. But still, I hope that does address that well. And I thank you once again for support and helping this channel to keep on running. And with that, we are on to the next one.
And this one goes to Uncle Sam's misguided child yet again, who puts in a 2 and says, Alan 2028, let's go LSA forever.
Hey, and Alan, and thank you for the support and help with this channel to keep on running. And of course, long live the LSA, and the LSA will never truly die. And so with that, we are on to the next one. And thank you so much once again.
And up next, big shout out to Bruce, who puts in a $2 donation. Also, Plazat, who puts in a 1. Antidote, who puts in a 1 as well. And Matthew James, who also puts in a $1 donation. And huge shout out to all 4 of you for that support. And for our last super chat of the night, this one is going to go to Stephen Miller. And that name sounds oddly familiar, but he puts in a $2 donation. And thank you very much for that support. He said, what's your take on the USA missiles entering Russia?
I think it was honestly a good call. Like, it's escalating things, but it was a great call. I think that should have been done a lot earlier, to be entirely honest. And so with that, I thank you for the support. I hope that does address that well. And with that, folks, as you all know, we are moving on into the live chat segment. However, due to massive time constraints, as we're starting to rapidly go overtime, we are going to be addressing the Morse code decoders of the stream and 3 live chats. And so with that, what do we got, Matthew?
And also, by the way, just to make this clear, by the way, some people were getting confused. We sent out the sticker, the LSA sticker, as the add-on, like for free with some of the orders, by the way. The patches were actually sold separately. So that wasn't just something we sent out, like, you know, as a goodie we added in the bag or anything like that.
I forgot.
Just to make that clear. As I see someone saying, I didn't get the patch. Trust me, if we sent out just the sticker, because we still have some patches left over. But anyways, moving on here to our live chat questions, we have our Morse code decoders of the stream. And tonight, we had Cliff Simonson, Mark Hodges, Earl Bernew, as well as Kevin J., Paul Schultz, David Millsaps, Royal Fluffiness, and Arabelle Garbo. They said the Morse code for today says, Russia says they will keep firing IRBMs, and I wonder, LLT, LSA.
And that is the sound of money, and y'all got that down on the nail. That was a jackpot. Y'all got the Morse code message absolutely correct. I got to congratulate y'all for getting that right once again, because it is absolutely amazing and impressive even that y'all continue to get that right dead on the nail time and time again. And so big congratulations to y'all. And with that, a big shout out to Bruce Lee, who threw in $1.50 super chat with a hot dog in it. But I thank you so much once again for support. I hope that does address that well. And we are on to the third to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Coder for Liberty, who says, are they running out of Iskanders, or do they just want to use these IRBMs because of what they represent?
They're just wanting to use them for what they represent, apparently. It's supposed to just continuously loom the nuclear threat over the West's head. And so I hope that does address that fairly well. And we are on to the second to last question of the night.
And this one goes to Purple Gerbil, who says, are the heavy bombers still in the Middle East, and would they use them in Russia or occupied Ukraine?
Yes, they are actually still in the Middle East somewhere in Saudi Arabia. I don't think they would be used against the Russian Federation, however, because they are not the nuclear-capable versions of the B-52s. These are actually the... well, hang on. No. Actually, correction. These are actually the nuclear-capable versions of the B-52s. We have some that are nuclear-capable and some that are not. They used to all be nuclear-capable, but then due to some nuclear reduction treaties, we ended up denuclearizing some of them. But these are actually the nuclear ones. I don't think there's any nuclear weapons, though, in the Middle East for them to be armed with and then fired into Russia, so I don't think so. I think they would largely be out of the nuclear exchange for the most part. But I hope that does address that fairly well. And with that, we are on to the final question of the night. And so, who was the lucky last person to throw in the lucky last question of the night?
And that viewer is gonna be a W13RD guy who says, will the U.S. agree to Putin's demands to keep Ukraine out of NATO?
Probably not. That would be a total victory sort of a thing where they could assure that. We would have to have some sort of assurances that Ukraine would be able to get into NATO at some point, because that is a kind of a bigger thing for us. Hell, maybe even honestly, if the Russians consider that to be that big of a deal, we could just tell them the front line freezes where it is. Y'all get everything that y'all control right now, but Ukraine gets in NATO. That could be another sort of a peace negotiation thing that could happen. Like, quite literally anything and everything could be agreed to in a peace negotiation, but the important thing is compromise. Neither side gets everything that they want, because that would be total victory, and that would not be a compromise. That would be just one side getting everything they want. It would be very one-sided. It would be unacceptable to the other. So That could be a possibility that they may not be able to join NATO, but they get some of their territory back. But honestly, I think at this point, the Ukrainian government would consider it an imperative to get in NATO, even if they had to give up the territories that are currently occupied by the Russians right now. And so with that, I hope that does address that the best I can. And with that, we are now at the end of tonight's stream. I've got to thank each and every single one of y'all for watching tonight. It has been an absolute honor and a pleasure to be able to cover all this news for each and every one of y'all and to really share really a historic moment that's happening today. A very dangerous and scary historic moment for some, but nevertheless one that will be remembered for the centuries. I've got to thank you all so much once again for watching, and we will see you all tomorrow at 10 p.m. Eastern Time to cover the next 24 hours of the news of the war in Ukraine. And so with that, good night, good luck, take care, stay safe, Slava Ukraini, and long live the Lee Spring Army. The Lee Spring Army will never die.
And once again, folks, thank you all for another great stream tonight. A very heavy topic tonight, but I think it was a very interesting discussion nonetheless. So be sure to join us tomorrow on the Short War video if there's enough news to cover. And tomorrow, you'll be hearing from me on the Short War video. It is my day to make the video. So if there is a news, you'll be hearing from me about midday or so. And also, be sure to join us at 10 p.m. Eastern tomorrow night for the remainder of the war news stream. And also, my mind's starting to go, as you can tell here. But anyways, Slava Ukraine, Herom Slava, get some rest, and thank you all once again, and good night.
Yes.
The Lee Spring Army sends its